Hey guys, tonight we're stepping into a 1950s American dining room where the mahogany table shines beneath a pair of candles. The good china has escaped from its padded case, and one apparently innocent sheet of stationery is capable of rearranging 3 friendships, 2 marriages, and the atmosphere of an entire block. The evening has not begun. No roast is in the oven. No guest has removed a coat. Yet the hostess is already holding the most dangerous object in the house, the guest list. Choose too few people and the dinner may look thin. Choose too many and the table becomes a railway timetable written in silverware. Invite the wrong combination, and 2 women who have not spoken since the church bazaar may find themselves sharing the peas. A successful party is supposed to appear spontaneous, warm and effortless. Although almost nothing about it is spontaneous, very little is effortless, and the warmth must be arranged several days in advance. Tonight's story is about the rules that governed that arrangement, who belonged at the table, who could safely sit beside whom, whose husband mattered at the office, whose opinions became dangerous after the second drink, and why the person doing all this calculation was expected to greet everyone as though the evening had simply floated into existence. Before we begin, take a second to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy quiet journeys into the forgotten routines, peculiar rules, and hidden pressures of old America. Tell me where you're listening from and what time it is there. And for tonight's subject, tell me whether your family ever had one person who could not be seated beside another without turning dessert into an international incident. Many of these stories begin with your suggestions, so keep them coming. Now dim the lights, pull the blanket up, let your shoulders relax and allow the modern world to become someone else's administrative problem for a while. The telephone can wait. The dishes can wait. Even the woman across the street who has noticed that your dining room curtains are still open can wait, although she may not agree. Get comfortable. We're going to spend the evening in a house where hospitality is presented as a pleasure managed like a campaign, and judged as evidence of a woman's character. What did an ordinary dinner invitation actually mean in the 1950s? How far ahead did a hostess begin planning? And how many quiet calculations were hidden inside the phrase, "just a few friends"? Could she invite her husband's supervisor without inviting the couple who had introduced them? Was it rude to separate married partners at the table, or clever to do so before they repeated the same stories to each other? What happened when one guest drank too much, another discussed politics, and a third arrived carrying a person whose name had never appeared on the invitation? Could a hostess admit that she did not enjoy one of her husband's colleagues? Could she decline to entertain because the budget was tight, the children were ill, or she was simply tired? And why did a pleasant evening between 6 adults require the strategic caution of a small diplomatic conference? Beneath all those questions sits a larger one. When the home became the stage on which a family displayed taste, stability, manners, and social belonging, how much of the hostess herself was allowed to remain private? Congratulations, you've just woken up in 1956. You're a married woman in a modest suburban house with a dining table that can seat 6 comfortably and 8 only, if everyone agrees not to possess elbows. A rotary telephone rests on a small table in the hallway. A community cookbook lies open beside a fountain pen. Your husband has casually mentioned that it might be useful to invite a man from his office and the man's wife to dinner next Saturday. He has delivered this information in the relaxed tone of someone who believes dinner begins when he sits down. You meanwhile can already see the tablecloth, the grocery bill, the children's temporary relocation, the condition of the guest towels, and the possibility that the office man's wife does not eat onions. Across the room the wall clock continues with the confidence of an object that will not be helping. You have 9 days. No pressure. The first task is not choosing the food. It is deciding who must be there to make the evening feel natural. A dinner for one important couple alone might look too obviously purposeful, especially when the important husband has some influence over your husband's working life. So another couple may be added to soften the arrangement, provide conversation, and create the impression that no one is being cultivated, impressed, assessed, or gently maneuvered toward a favourable opinion. Of course, everyone may understand that this is exactly what is happening. The rule is not that ambition must be absent. The rule is that ambition must wear a clean dress and offer coffee. You begin mentally sorting acquaintances. One couple is lively, but the husband tells long stories and does not notice when they end. Another is dependable, but the wife has recently quarrelled with the woman you are already considering. A third couple would be ideal, except they entertained you last month, and inviting them now may look less like friendship than repayment. Hospitality has its own invisible ledger. Nobody brings it to the table, but many people know approximately what is written in it. An invitation received but never returned may sit in memory for months. A new neighbour left out too often may become a subject at the next bridge table. A couple included only when an extra pair is needed may eventually notice the pattern. None of this requires open hostility. Open hostility would be much easier. Instead, social position is communicated through pauses, recurring omissions, and the interesting discovery that everyone else was apparently free last Saturday. Etiquette authorities helped give this uncertainty a printed shape. Amy Vanderbilt's Major Etiquette Guide first appeared in 1952 and treated invitations, hosting table arrangements, and guest behaviour as subjects worthy of detailed instruction. The existence of such books did not mean every American household followed formal rules, nor that every hostess owned the same china, served the same courses, or moved within the same social world. Rural families, city apartment dwellers, black middle-class households, immigrant families, church communities, wealthy homes with paid help, and working-class homes where every chair had to be borrowed experienced entertaining differently. But the wider message was recognizable. A guest list should appear socially balanced, personally considerate, and free of visible desperation. You were expected to remember who had invited you, who was new to the neighbourhood, who might feel excluded, who would mix well, and who would spend the entire evening silently punishing someone across the table. This was called graciousness. It was also unpaid intelligence work performed with address books, memory, and a very polite voice on the telephone. By Thursday afternoon, the list has been rewritten 4 times. Names have moved in and out as though awaiting clearance from a small domestic government. Your husband suggests inviting whoever you like, a phrase that sounds generous, until you realize he has also rejected 2 couples and added 1 man from accounting. You stand in the hallway with the receiver against your ear, smoothing the telephone cord between your fingers while you make the first call. Your voice must sound pleased but not anxious, casual but not careless, warm, but not so warm that the evening appears important. The invitation itself becomes a performance before the performance. When the first woman accepts relief arrives quickly, followed by another problem. Now the rest of the table must be built around her. A dinner party promises companionship and often delivers it. People laugh, share food, exchange news, and form friendships that may last for years. Yet before that warmth can exist, someone must quietly predict it. She must turn personalities into place settings, obligations into invitations, and private dislikes into acceptable conversation. Then, when the bell finally rings, she must open the door smiling as though none of this required calculation at all. The guest list is finished at least until someone declines someone's mother comes to town, or your husband remembers another colleague whose presence is suddenly essential. For the moment, the names sit neatly on the page beneath the warm dining room light. They look harmless. So do most complicated systems when written in blue ink. The invitation, however, still has to be delivered correctly. An invitation was not merely a request for company. It was a small document announcing that you understood time rank obligation and the dangerous emotional distance between too soon and too late. By Friday morning, the names on your list have stopped moving, which is already a triumph. Now they must be invited. For a formal dinner, written invitations may be appropriate, especially when the occasion carries weight. The guests are not intimate friends, or the hostess wishes to make clear that this is an event rather than an improvised plate of sandwiches. For a smaller gathering among familiar couples, the telephone may be perfectly acceptable. The difficulty is not choosing between paper and receiver. The difficulty is deciding when to use either one. Invite people too far in advance, and the evening begins to resemble a civic ceremony. Invite them too late, and they may suspect they were not your first choice, which in several cases is unfortunately accurate. A hostess is expected to calculate the right amount of notice without revealing that any calculation has occurred. The invitation must feel generous rather than strategic, casual rather than careless, and important enough to accept without seeming important enough to cause alarm. Apparently, friendship requires excellent scheduling. You sit at the small desk in the corner of the living room with a box of stationery, a blotter, and the fountain pen that behaves perfectly until elegance is required. The paper is cream-folded once and decorated with nothing more ambitious than your initials. A printed card would be too formal for this particular evening, but an ordinary note may be too loose, so you compose a sentence that appears effortless only after 3 rejected versions. You and your husband would be very pleased if Mr. and Mrs. Harrison could join you for dinner on Saturday the 17th at 7:30. The day, date, hour, hosts, and purpose must all be clear. There should be no mystery about whether the invitation includes dinner, cocktails, children, an overnight stay, or merely the opportunity to stand in the living room while pretending not to watch the clock. You reread the line. Very pleased sounds sincere, delighted sounds warmer, perhaps too warm. Join us sounds friendly. Have dinner with us sounds direct. Each phrase carries a small social temperature. The pen rests above the page while the house remains quiet except for the refrigerator's hum and a delivery truck passing outside. A modern message can be written, corrected, and sent before doubt has time to put on its shoes. Your invitation requires paper, ink, an envelope, a stamp, and the emotional endurance to live with every word after it has entered the mailbox. The telephone offers speed but not escape. When you call the second couple, you must select an hour when the woman of the house is likely to be home, but not preparing lunch, collecting children, bathing a baby, shopping, entertaining someone else, or resting in a manner that respectable women are not supposed to describe as resting. Late morning may work, early afternoon may work. The dinner hour certainly does not. You lift the receiver, listen for the dial tone, and place one finger into each numbered opening of the rotary dial. The wheel returns with a soft mechanical clicking that gives every call the measured gravity of launching a small machine. When the woman answers, you identify yourself, exchange the correct amount of neighborhood news, and then extend the invitation clearly. You do not begin with 10 minutes of conversation, and reveal the dinner at the end because she may spend those 10 minutes wondering what you want. You do not begin so abruptly that she suspects an emergency. You create a smooth passage from ordinary friendliness to organized hospitality. If she hesitates, you must not sound disappointed. If she accepts immediately, you must not sound relieved. If she says she must ask her husband, you wait pleasantly even though your seating plan, menu size, and invitation to the next couple may all depend upon the answer. The receiver cord curls around your wrist. The wall clock ticks. Gracious living has entered a holding pattern. A prompt reply matters because one unanswered invitation can suspend the entire evening. The hostess may need to invite another couple if the first declines, but she cannot safely do so too quickly without creating evidence of replacement. Suppose Mrs. Harrison keeps the note on her mantel for 5 days while deciding whether another engagement might appear. During those 5 days, you cannot complete the table. You cannot know whether 6 or 8 people will be eating. You cannot confidently order the meat, borrow 2 extra chairs, or decide whether the blue cloth will cover the table after the leaves are inserted. The polite guest is therefore expected to answer without unnecessary delay. Acceptance creates an obligation. Once she has said yes, a better invitation should not remove her from yours. Illness, family trouble, and genuine emergencies may excuse a cancellation. Sudden enthusiasm for a more impressive dining room does not. The rule protects the hostess, but it also exposes the social machinery beneath the evening. Invitations are not only expressions of affection, they're commitments that allow labour to begin. Flour can be measured, silver-counted children assigned elsewhere, and uncertainty reduced to a manageable quantity. A guest who treats the invitation casually may never see the extra work created by her delay. She sees one envelope. You see Saturday spreading across the week. Even a refusal must be handled with care. A guest should decline, warmly offer a believable reason without providing a medical report, and avoid language that suggests relief. The hostess in return should accept the answer without interrogation. "We shall miss you" is appropriate. But "what are you doing" is not even when curiosity is actively attempting to climb through the telephone. If the reason is another dinner, no one should ask whose dinner. If the couple is unavailable because relatives are visiting you, do not suggest bringing the relatives unless the evening can genuinely absorb them. An invitation issued to 2 people does not quietly expand to 4, merely because Aunt Mildred has arrived from Ohio. Children are another matter requiring clarity. In many adult dinner gatherings, they are not included unless specifically mentioned. A mother cannot assume that 3 young companions accompany her invitation like luggage, yet the hostess must phrase the arrangement without making family life sound contagious. She may mention that the evening is planned for adults, suggest a trusted sitter, or arrange for her own children to eat earlier and disappear upstairs. The goal is to establish limits while preserving warmth. This is the central art of etiquette, saying something definite in a manner soft enough to make everyone pretend no boundary has been drawn. The correct notice also depends on what sort of dinner this is. A formal occasion, a holiday meal, a gathering connected to business, or an evening involving guests from outside the neighbourhood may require more preparation, and therefore more advance warning. An informal supper with close friends can be arranged more quickly, especially when no one expects engraved cards, multiple courses, or a table large enough to require architectural approval. Experiences vary enormously. Families with limited income may entertain through shared dishes, Sunday meals, church gatherings, porch suppers, or spontaneous visits rather than carefully staged seated dinners. Rural communities may be shaped by travel distance and farm schedules. Urban guests may depend on trains, buses, taxis, or apartment routines. Religious customs may determine which evening is appropriate, what food can be served, whether alcohol appears, and when guests must leave. Shift work, domestic employment, military schedules and childcare may make elegant notice periods less important than practical availability. Etiquette books describe ideals. Life negotiates with them. Still, across many middle-class social settings, the ability to issue and answer an invitation correctly signals that you understand the rhythm of other people's lives. Time itself becomes a form of manners. By the following Tuesday, 3 couples have accepted and 1 has declined. The dining table will seat 8 after all, although seat may be a generous verb for the 2 people near the corners. The written replies are placed beside the telephone, and the names in your notebook are finely marked in ink. Relief lasts perhaps 4 minutes. Then Mrs. Harrison calls. Her husband has remembered a Saturday obligation that may end late, but they still hope to come. They may arrive at 8 instead of 7:30. She asks whether that will be all right. You say, of course. Your voice remains smooth. Inside your mind, the roast changes temperature, the cocktails lengthen. The first course waits, and 6 punctual guests begin wondering whether dinner has been delayed by tragedy or poor management. You could ask the Harrisons to decline. You could move the entire meal. You could serve everyone else on time and let the late couple enter during the main course. An arrival that would make the room turn toward them like flowers following the sun. Instead, you promise that everything will be perfectly fine. This is not dishonesty. It is hosting. You replace the receiver look toward the dining room and understand that the invitation has completed its work. The guests know when to arrive, more or less. Now the house must be made worthy of receiving them. The living room was not simply where guests waited for dinner. It was the family's evidence. By Saturday morning, the room has stopped being a place where anyone actually lives and has become a polished argument about what sort of people live here. The newspaper disappears from the armchair. The children's school books are carried upstairs. A sweater draped over the sofa is removed with the urgency normally reserved for smoke. You open the floral curtains and study the room in daylight, which is an unkind but efficient inspector. Dust shows along the dark edge of the radio cabinet. Fingerprints gather on the glass-topped coffee table. One sofa cushion has collapsed slightly in the center, revealing that someone in this household occasionally sits down. This must be corrected. The room should suggest comfort without presenting evidence of use prosperity, without vulgar display and taste without appearing to have tried too hard. It should say that your family reads books, listens to music, receives friends, and never loses a button beneath the furniture. The guests will spend perhaps 20 minutes here before dinner. You will spend most of the day preparing for those 20 minutes. The mathematics of hospitality is generous in this way. Cleaning begins with the surfaces people are most likely to notice and expands towards surfaces no reasonable guest would examine. You dust the end tables, polish the wooden arms of the chairs, wipe the lampshades, and run a cloth along the picture frames. Then you notice the baseboards. The baseboards have not changed since yesterday, but in the presence of expected company they acquire moral significance. The vacuum cleaner comes out of the hall closet heavy and metallic, with a cord that catches beneath furniture as though attempting to protect the dust. Fresh tracks must run neatly across the rug because a carpet without visible vacuum lines may suggest that cleaning has not occurred, while a carpet with lines suggests effortless order. No one is supposed to think about the machine, the lifting, the noise, or the woman leaning into it with both hands. They're simply supposed to encounter cleanliness as a natural condition of the house. You move the sofa forward and discover a crayon, 2 pennies, and a fragment of breakfast cereal that has been living independently beneath it. These are removed. The sofa returns to its place. The room now looks exactly as it did before, only at the cost of an hour and a considerable amount of lower back. The furniture must also be arranged for conversation, which means every chair is now part of a social diagram. Seats placed too far apart make the room feel cold. Seats placed too close together require guests to manage knees, cigarette smoke, and unfamiliar perfume at intimate range. The host needs a position from which he can greet arriving couples and circulate drinks. The hostess needs access to the hallway dining room kitchen, and anyone who appears stranded near the curtains. A particularly comfortable chair should not be offered to the guest most likely to remain in it all evening. The quietest person may need to sit near someone encouraging, although not someone so encouraging that the quiet guest begins to resemble a witness under examination. You angle 2 chairs toward the sofa and move a small table between them for glasses and ashtrays. Then you sit briefly in each place, testing the view. From one chair, the lampshade blocks half the room. From another, the guest faces directly toward the family photograph in which your youngest child is crying. The photograph is replaced with one in which everyone appears willing to belong to the same household. Interior decoration has now become witness management. The room must contain enough objects to look personal, but not so many that it looks crowded or difficult to clean. A few magazines may be placed on the coffee table, carefully selected and fanned into a casual arrangement requiring several attempts. The issue with the most attractive cover goes on top. Anything too controversial, too intimate, too worn, or too obviously borrowed is removed. A book may rest beside the lamp, suggesting that someone reads in the evening. It should not appear untouched, but it should also not contain a grocery receipt marking page 12. Family photographs are inspected for flattering expression, straight frames, and relatives whose presence may lead to complicated questions. Decorative figurines stand on the mantel with the confidence of objects that contribute nothing to the evening except the possibility of being broken. A bowl, a vase, or a small arrangement of flowers introduces colour. Too little decoration may look plain. Too much may look boastful. The ideal room appears to have assembled itself through natural good judgment. No one sees you move the same ceramic horse 3 times before deciding that it has been expressing itself perfectly well on the left. Smell requires its own strategy because a clean room can still betray the rest of the house. Furniture polish lingers warmly over the wood. The vacuum leaves a faint dusty heat in the air. From the kitchen come onions, butter, and the unmistakable suggestion that dinner is being produced by physical processes. Food should smell inviting when the guests arrive, but it should not announce that the hostess has spent 6 hours trapped beside a roasting pan. You open a window briefly, even though the afternoon air is cool, then close it before the room loses its warmth. An ashtray is set near each cluster of chairs, emptied and washed, because smoking is expected in many social gatherings, and yesterday's cigarettes are not considered part of tonight's decor. Matches are placed nearby. If the household has a lighter, it is filled and tested. A guest should never have to search for fire a seat or somewhere to place a glass. Hospitality attempts to remove every small inconvenience before it can become visible. The hostess therefore imagines problems no one else has yet encountered. She's part housekeeper, part stage manager, and part emergency service for events that may never occur. The living room also displays what the family can afford, which makes every choice slightly dangerous. A new television set may be a point of pride, but leaving it as the visual centre of the room can make conversation appear secondary. The screen is dark, polished, and waiting. If it is turned on, the gathering may become less formal and more relaxed, but the guests may stop speaking to one another. If it remains off, someone may ask about a program, and the host must decide whether the evening can survive 10 minutes of broadcast entertainment. The radio and record player offer gentler background sound. A stack of records is considered not only for music, but for what the selection implies. Something lively may encourage conversation. Something too romantic may change the atmosphere in ways not approved by the seating plan. Something too modern may disturb an older guest. The volume must be high enough to soften silences and low enough not to compete with introductions. Even music is given a domestic assignment. It must support the evening while drawing no attention to its labour, a role with which the hostess may already feel some professional sympathy. Not every home could meet the same standard, and not every family wanted to. A small apartment might require the dining table to share space with the living room. A working-class household might move children's beds, folding chairs, or laundry baskets, simply to make room for company. Families in rural areas could receive visitors in kitchens, parlours, porches, or yards, where the boundary between formal entertaining and ordinary life was less rigid. In homes with paid domestic help, the polished room concealed someone else's labour, often performed by women whose own houses and families received far less public attention. Black domestic workers were especially central to maintaining many white middle and upper-class homes, while facing restricted employment choices and unequal treatment. The magazines that displayed serene living rooms rarely showed the full chain of work behind them. Yet across different households, the same basic wish remained understandable. Guests should feel welcomed, and the home should reflect care. Pride in a room was not false merely because pressure accompanied it. The pleasure was real. So was the fatigue. By late afternoon, the living room is ready. The curtains hang evenly. The magazines have achieved convincing informality. The ashtrays are empty. The lamps cast warm pools of light, and the ceramic horse has survived another strategic deployment. Your husband walks through, glances around, and says that everything looks nice. This is meant as praise. It also confirms that the day's labour has succeeded in making itself invisible. He does not see the dust cloth drying near the kitchen sink, the vacuum hidden behind the bedroom door, or the pile of displaced family life temporarily stored upstairs. The children have been warned not to enter unless injured, and preferably not even then. For the next several hours the room will belong to the guests. They will place coats in the bedroom glasses on the tables, cigarette ash near, but not always inside the ashtrays, and themselves in the carefully arranged chairs. The room will gradually return to life, which is both the purpose of preparing it and a mild insult to the preparation. Before that can happen, however, the dinner itself must be chosen. The room has made its promise. The menu now has to keep it. The menu was not simply a list of food. It was a financial statement disguised as hospitality. By Saturday morning, the dining room may be polished and the guest list settled, but the refrigerator still contains an ordinary family's supplies, half a jar of mustard, a bottle of milk, several eggs, leftover vegetables, and one piece of cheese being guarded for lunches. None of these items appears prepared to represent the household before important company. The dinner must look generous without looking wasteful, fashionable without looking experimental, and expensive without actually becoming expensive. Too plain, and the hostess may seem unimaginative. Too elaborate, and she risks appearing boastful or financially reckless. The ideal menu gives the impression that good food simply occurs in this house whenever people happen to visit. It should not reveal the arithmetic performed at the kitchen table, the substitutions made at the grocery counter, or the moment when you quietly decide that one roast can feed 8 adults if the slices are thin and the side dishes are persuasive. Elegance like gravy is often improved by careful stretching. You begin with the main course because everything else must support it. Beef carries a sense of occasion, but a large roast can consume a discouraging portion of the weekly food budget before a single potato has been peeled. Chicken is more economical and familiar, although serving it to guests may require a preparation grand enough to prevent anyone from remembering that they also ate chicken on Tuesday. Ham can feed a crowd and produce leftovers, but its sweetness salt, and associations with holidays may not suit every table. Fish presents questions of freshness, smell, timing, and whether one guest will regard bones as a personal betrayal. A casserole can be practical, warm and fashionable, especially when made with convenience ingredients promoted in cookbooks and magazines. Yet it may look too informal for an evening designed partly to impress your husband's colleague. You sit with a pencil, grocery advertisements, and several recipe pages spread beneath the kitchen light. Prices are compared, portions are estimated, ingredients that can appear in more than one dish gain immediate respect. Cream may enrich the sauce and return later in dessert. Celery can join the relish tray, the stuffing, and tomorrow's soup. Parsley has almost no nutritional authority over the meal, but it can make several plates appear as though a professional has recently passed through. The menu also needs balance, a word that sounds calm until you try to achieve it with 6 dishes, 1 oven, and a limited number of serving bowls. A rich main course calls for lighter vegetables. A pale entree needs colour. A soft dish needs something crisp. If potatoes are creamed, perhaps the vegetable should not also arrive beneath a blanket of sauce, unless the evening's theme is surrender. The first course should awaken the appetite without satisfying it. The dessert should feel special but not so heavy that the guests become quiet and begin calculating the distance home. A cold starter can be prepared ahead, which is valuable. A hot starter creates another last-minute obligation, which is not. The hostess must think not only about flavour but about traffic. How many burners will be occupied? Which dish can wait? Which one collapses if the guests are 20 minutes late? Can the oven hold the meat rolls and casserole at the same time? Or must they negotiate temporary borders? The menu is therefore planned backward from the moment everyone sits down. Food is assigned a schedule. Serving dishes are assigned a purpose. The kitchen becomes an office in which every vegetable has received instructions. Appearance matters because guests eat first with their eyes and then more dangerously with their memories. A well-arranged platter can make modest ingredients look abundant. Slices of meat overlap in a neat fan. Carrots, green beans, or peas provide colour around pale potatoes. A sprig of parsley implies that the meal has been supervised. Small dishes of pickles, olives, radishes, or celery fill the table and create a sense of variety at relatively little cost. These accompaniments also give guests something to discuss before the main course arrives. The olive dish alone may occupy a surprising amount of social space. Cookbooks and magazine photographs encourage careful presentation, often showing tables where every plate, napkin, and vegetable appears to have been borne with excellent posture. The photographs rarely include the pan soaking in the sink, the spoon that fell behind the stove, or the hostess realizing that the decorative lettuce has wilted. Nevertheless, the image has influence. You trim, fold, garnish, and arrange because presentation can convert economy into intention. A small portion appears less small when placed at the center of a large plate and surrounded by confidence. Dessert offers another opportunity to spend less while appearing generous. A homemade cake suggests effort, but it also requires time-reliable baking and the willingness to face guests after an uneven layer has been disguised with frosting. A pie can be prepared earlier, though the crust may choose the evening of the dinner to develop strong personal opinions. Gelatin desserts are economical, colourful, and promoted as modern, but they carry the risk of trembling under observation in a way that makes everyone slightly aware of mortality. Ice cream is dependable and popular, yet serving it neatly to 8 people requires speed and a freezer with sufficient authority. A pudding fruit dessert or baked custard can stretch modest ingredients into individual portions that look deliberate. Coffee will follow, perhaps with small candies or nuts if the budget permits. The dessert must end the meal on a note of abundance, even if the abundance has been carefully measured into 8 matching dishes. Your husband may later remark that everyone seemed to enjoy it. He will not know that the whipped topping was distributed with the precision of wartime fuel. The cost of the dinner extends beyond food. There may be flowers, candles, ice extra cream cocktail ingredients, cigarette supplies, paper cocktail napkins, or a missing serving utensil discovered too late. A chipped plate may need to be replaced or strategically assigned to the hostess. The tablecloth may require laundering. A neighbour may be asked to lend folding chairs, wine glasses, or a second coffee pot, creating a future obligation to return the favour. Even the use of electricity, gas, and hot water increases as ovens heat dishes accumulate, and baths are taken before the guests arrive. None of these expenses is dramatic by itself. Together they turn an evening described as just dinner into a small household investment. For families living close to the edge of the weekly budget, entertaining may require several days of cheaper meals before or after the event. The guests see roast vegetables, rolls, salad, and dessert. They do not see Wednesday's meatless supper or the decision to postpone buying new stockings. Hospitality can be deeply sincere and financially inconvenient at the same time. Class shaped what counted as impressive and what counted as excessive. A wealthy hostess with domestic help could plan several courses, imported foods, and formal service without performing every task herself. A middle-class hostess might imitate the appearance of that service using prepared foods, borrowed pieces, and careful timing. A working-class family might offer a generous one-dish supper, a large homemade dessert, or a table crowded with food contributed by relatives. In many black communities, immigrant households, church circles, and regional traditions, hospitality followed its own customs, flavors, and measures of generosity, often ignored by mainstream magazines that presented one white suburban table as though it represented the nation. The pressure to impress was not identical everywhere, but the desire to make guests feel honored was widely understood. Food could express affection, cultural identity, pride, gratitude, and belonging. It could also expose income, skill, and access. A dish might be praised for being delicious while quietly evaluated for what it suggested about the household serving it. By noon, the menu is finally written in order: a small appetizer, the main course, 2 vegetables, salad, rolls, dessert, and coffee. On paper, it looks calm. The ingredients appear cooperative. The timing seems possible. You fold the grocery list and place it in your handbag, knowing that the supermarket will now test every assumption you have made. The advertised roast may be smaller than expected. The lettuce may be bruised. The cream may cost more than it did last week. A planned garnish may be unavailable, forcing the entire visual dignity of the platter onto parsley. Still, the menu has achieved its purpose. It promises that the household is prosperous enough to be generous, sensible enough not to be wasteful, and skilled enough to hide the distance between the two. Now the promise must be served on actual dishes, and those dishes have their own rules. The table did not merely hold the dinner. It displayed the household's claim to respectability. By early afternoon, the groceries have been put away, the roast is waiting, and the dining room has become the next department of domestic government. You open the cabinet where the good china has been stored behind glass, protected from ordinary meals, and from the dangerous possibility of being used too often. Each plate comes out carefully lifted by the edges and inspected beneath the window light. One has a faint scratch. Another carries a tiny chip near the rim, small enough to ignore on Tuesday, and large enough to threaten civilization on Saturday. The chipped plate is quietly assigned to you. This is one of the privileges of being hostess. The guests receive perfection. You receive whatever remains after perfection has been distributed. The pattern may have been chosen from a department store display before your wedding, perhaps entered on a bridal registry and purchased piece by piece by relatives who hoped the plates would outlast several appliances and most family disagreements. Now the dinner plates, salad plates, cups, saucers, serving bowls, and gravy boat emerge like members of a formal organization that meets only on important occasions. Their purpose is not simply to carry food. They must suggest continuity, care, preparedness, and the reassuring idea that this household owns enough matching objects to survive company. Matching matters, although the definition of matching has begun to change. Older expectations favor complete sets, formal patterns, and the quiet authority of inherited or wedding china. Newer tableware offers color, simpler shapes, and a more relaxed modern style. Some post-war designers encourage families to mix pieces, use open stock patterns, and treat the dinner table as part of contemporary living rather than a museum of fragile obligations. This sounds liberating until you stand before your own cabinet trying to decide whether the modern serving platter looks adventurous beside the floral plates or merely lost. The magazines show confident combinations. Real tables contain whatever was affordable received as a gift inherited from an aunt, bought during a sale or borrowed from the woman next door. A hostess with a full matching service may feel secure. A hostess with 6 plates from one pattern and 2 from another must become creative. The odd plates can be placed at the ends of the table where the host will sit or hidden beneath the first course, and replaced before anyone has time to conduct an investigation. A plain white plate may be presented as deliberate restraint. A mismatched cup can become charming if the hostess behaves as though charm was always the plan. Taste like confidence is often a decision made after the cupboard has been opened. The silver arrives next, wrapped in soft cloth, or stored in a lined box that smells faintly of wood fabric and delayed responsibility. If the flatware is real silver or silver plate, it may have tarnished while waiting for this moment. Tarnish has a special talent for appearing when guests are expected, as though metal itself enjoys participating in social pressure. You spread newspaper across the kitchen table, apply polish, rub each handle, and watch the darkened surface return to brightness. Forks, knives, spoons, serving pieces, and perhaps a butter spreader are counted against the guest list. 7 matching forks and 1 slightly different fork create a problem that would not trouble a hungry person, but may trouble a hostess who has spent the week studying arrangements. The different fork goes to you. Again, rank has its compensations. If several courses are planned, the utensils must be placed in the order they will be used, beginning at the outside and moving inward. The simple rule is meant to reduce confusion, though the number of pieces required to demonstrate simplicity can become impressive. A guest should be able to approach the meal without asking which fork belongs to the salad. The table has already answered. It has answered with 3 forks, 2 spoons, and the calm authority of a filing system. The tablecloth provides the background against which all this order must be visible. You unfold the best linen and discover the rectangular memory of the last time it was stored. Creases run across it like roads on a map. The cloth must be laundered, dried, and ironed until it lies smooth enough to suggest that fabric naturally behaves this way. It does not. The ironing board stands in the kitchen while steam rises and the iron moves carefully over the damp material. A small scorch would be disastrous. A faint stain from an earlier meal requires negotiation. Perhaps the centerpiece can cover it. Perhaps a serving dish can be stationed there throughout dinner with unusual loyalty. The cloth should hang evenly on all sides, neither too short nor so long that a guest catches it with a knee and begins moving the entire table toward the door. Beneath it, a protective pad may soften noise and guard the wood from heat moisture and the energetic placement of serving dishes. When the cloth is finally centered, you walk around the table adjusting it by inches. From one side it looks straight. From the other, the pattern appears to drift. You pull left, then right, then return it almost exactly to its original position. This is progress. Napkins must be folded, and folding introduces choices. A simple rectangle looks neat and practical. A more elaborate fold suggests effort, which is desirable only if the effort remains invisible. Cloth napkins may match the tablecloth or provide contrast. They should be spotless pressed and large enough to perform their purpose without resembling handkerchiefs. Each one is placed beside or upon the plate according to the level of formality and the arrangement chosen. Napkin rings may appear in some homes, especially for family use, but a dinner party demands a fresh napkin for each guest, not the personalized ring that has been quietly preserving someone's breakfast history. You fold the fabric on the dining table, pressing each edge with your fingertips. The children have been told not to touch anything. One child enters anyway, looks at the finished arrangement, and asks why the table is dressed for a wedding. You tell him to go upstairs. He leaves with the expression of someone who has just confirmed that adults occasionally arrange forks for emotional reasons. Glassware brings another set of calculations. Water glasses must be polished until no fingerprints remain. Cocktail glasses, wine glasses, or highball glasses may be needed depending on what the household serves and what the guests drink. Not every family uses alcohol, and customs vary by religion, region, income, and personal choice. But where cocktails are part of the evening, the glasses become part of the welcome. A chipped rim is unacceptable. Cloudy glass suggests poor washing, hard water, or insufficient attention, all of which the glass is apparently qualified to report. You hold each piece toward the light and rub it with a clean cloth, careful not to twist the bowl away from the stem. The water glass sits above the knife. Additional glasses line up beside it in a controlled formation. Too many pieces make the table look formal but crowded. Too few may require interruptions later. Every object must be present before it is needed, because the ideal dinner moves without visible scrambling. The hostess should not discover halfway through the main course that the gravy ladle is still in the drawer, or that one guest has been given a teaspoon with which to attack soup. Place settings also determine where the human beings will go, and this is where objects become social architecture. The plate sits before the chair. Forks wait on the left, knives and spoons on the right, knife blades turn toward the plate, rather than toward the guest, which is a comforting symbolic choice. A bread and butter plate may sit above the forks if the meal and household style call for one. Salt and pepper must be available without forcing anyone to reach across the table. Serving dishes should be close enough to circulate and far enough from candles, glasses, sleeves, and any guest who speaks with expressive hands. Place cards may be used at a formal dinner, especially when seating has been planned carefully. The small card removes uncertainty, while also confirming that uncertainty was serious enough to require stationery. Your husband's colleague is placed where conversation can reach him easily. His wife is seated beside someone warm and socially reliable. The couple who sometimes bicker are separated not as punishment but as a public service. You and your husband will anchor different areas of the table. He will help sustain conversation. You will monitor courses, glasses, serving dishes, expressions, and the distant condition of the kitchen while appearing to discuss vacations. Not every household possessed formal china, silver, linen, crystal, or a dining room large enough to display them. Some families ate company meals from everyday dishes made special by abundant food and careful arrangement. Folding tables, borrowed chairs, enamel serving bowls, pressed cotton cloths, and mismatched cups could support hospitality every bit as genuine as a complete wedding service. In working-class homes, immigrant households, black communities, rural kitchens, and extended family gatherings, respectability might be expressed through generosity, cleanliness, cultural tradition, or the determination that no guest leave hungry. Mainstream advertising often narrowed the picture, presenting a well-equipped white suburban hostess as the natural center of American domestic life. The image encouraged women to judge themselves through possessions that many could not afford and others did not consider necessary. Yet the pride attached to a beautifully set table was not entirely manufactured. These objects marked marriages, anniversaries, inheritances, sacrifices, and family histories. A serving bowl might have come from a mother. A platter might appear at every holiday for decades. The table could carry affection as well as status. The contradiction was that objects meant to support togetherness could become another examination the hostess had to pass. By 5 o'clock the table is complete. The cloth lies smooth. The china forms 8 pale circles beneath the light. Silver flashes beside each plate glasses rise in careful rows, and folded napkins wait with more discipline than most adults. You stand in the doorway and take in the result. It looks calm, balanced, and inevitable. Nothing about it appears to have required polishing paste and ironing board, 3 cabinet searches, 2 borrowed pieces, and the strategic concealment of a stain beneath the future location of the potatoes. Your husband walks past and asks whether it is safe to sit down. You tell him it is not. For the next several hours, the table is less a piece of furniture than a protected site. Soon flowers and candles will be added, and they must make the arrangement look warmer, without blocking conversation, dropping wax-shedding petals, or setting the centerpiece on fire. Respectability has been laid out in measured inches. Now it needs decoration. The centerpiece was supposed to make the table look effortless, which meant it required another hour of work. By late afternoon, the china is aligned, the silver is polished, and the tablecloth has finally accepted its assigned position. Now the center of the table waits like an empty stage. Something must go there. Flowers are the obvious choice because they suggest freshness, taste, and the reassuring belief that this household has enough control over life to place nature in a vase and make it behave. But flowers bring questions. They must be noticeable without becoming theatrical colourful, without fighting the china, and fragrant without overpowering the roast. Most importantly, they must be low enough for guests to see one another across the table. A tall arrangement may look magnificent from the doorway, but once everyone sits down, it becomes a decorative hedge dividing the room into opposing territories. The guest on one side must lean left to speak. The guest opposite leans right. Soon the entire table is shifting around the flowers like motorists approaching road construction. A centerpiece should encourage conversation, not require binoculars. This is one of the few moments in domestic etiquette when making something smaller is officially considered progress. You gather what is available. Perhaps there are chrysanthemums from the florist, carnations from the grocery counter, or clipped greenery from the yard. Roses would be elegant, but the price may be less cooperative than the petals. Seasonal flowers are sensible, though the arrangement must not look as if it was assembled from whatever survived behind the garage. You carry the vase to the kitchen sink, fill it, trim the stems, and remove leaves that would sit below the waterline. The stems are cut at slightly different lengths to create shape, which sounds simple, until the first flower becomes too short and must spend the evening hiding near the rim. You turn the vase, add greenery, remove greenery, and turn it again. One side looks full, the other looks surprised. A flower bends toward the salt cellar. Another appears determined to escape. The magazines suggest that floral arranging is a pleasant feminine art performed in a clean apron with relaxed wrists. Your own version involves scissors, damp newspaper, fallen leaves, and the growing suspicion that carnations possess a chain of command. Eventually, the arrangement settles into a low oval, broad enough to look generous, and short enough not to conceal Mr. Harrison's face. This is important because the purpose of inviting him was not to spend dinner speaking to his forehead through vegetation. Colour must be considered against everything already on the table. Red flowers can look dramatic, but beside a heavily patterned plate, they may create the impression that several decorative ideas have arrived without being introduced. White flowers are elegant, though too much white linen. White china and pale food may make the table feel like a formal meeting of dairy products. Yellow adds warmth. Pink may soften dark furniture. Greenery can connect the arrangement to the room, provided it does not shed into the gravy. The vase itself must cooperate. A crystal vase catches candlelight but may be too tall. A silver bowl looks impressive but requires more polishing, and may reflect every nearby object with unwanted honesty. A plain ceramic container can be charming, but only if its simplicity appears deliberate. You try one, then another. The first is too narrow, the second is too modern. The third has a small crack hidden near the base, a feature that becomes more exciting once it is filled with water and placed over the best tablecloth. At last, a shallow glass bowl is chosen. It sits firmly, holds the flowers low, and does not threaten to collapse. The domestic standard for elegance is sometimes simply finding the object least likely to leak. Candles are added because electric light alone can be practical, but candlelight is expected to make everyone look calmer, younger, and more forgiving of the menu. Two tapers in matching holders create symmetry. Their height should frame the flowers without rising into the line of sight. The candles must stand straight. A leaning candle looks careless and may drip wax across the cloth the silver, or a guest who has already made an effort with her sleeves. You warm the bases slightly and press them into the holders, adjusting each until it appears disciplined. Then you step back. One still leans. You adjust it again. Now the other one looks wrong. For several minutes the candles participate in a quiet disagreement about verticality. When they are finally aligned, their wicks must be trimmed and tested. A candle that refuses to light at dinner creates delay. A candle that burns too quickly turns the evening into a measurement of time. A candle that smokes darkly may perfume the salad with the atmosphere of a railway station. The flame should be steady, modest, and decorative. It should contribute warmth while making no demands. In other words, the candle has been assigned almost exactly the same role as the hostess. Lighting the candles too early wastes them and risks wax drips before the guests arrive. Lighting them too late leaves you searching for matches while someone waits to sit down. They're usually lit shortly before dinner after the first drinks, but before the guests enter the dining room. Until then, the matches must remain nearby but not visibly abandoned on the table. A small matchbox may be placed discreetly on the sideboard. Spare candles should be available because no rule of hospitality has ever prevented a wick from breaking at the worst possible moment. The holders must also be stable. A guest reaching for bread should not brush a flame with a cuff. A serving dish should not pass so close that the parsley receives a brief and unnecessary cooking. The arrangement is tested from every chair. You look across the table and imagine arms moving, dishes circulating, glasses being lifted, and conversation becoming more animated. One candle stands too near the serving space. It is moved an inch. The flowers crowd the salt. They are shifted slightly. The entire centerpiece has now travelled less than the width of your hand, but the process has required the concentration of urban planning. Fragrance creates another quiet danger. Flowers with a heavy scent may interfere with food, especially in a warm room where perfumes, cigarette smoke, roasting meat, and furniture polish are already attempting to occupy the same air. The arrangement should smell fresh, not announce itself before the first course. Scented candles are unnecessary and may be disastrous. Dinner already has a smell. It has been working on one all afternoon. A strong floral candle beside cream sauce and coffee would create an experience no cookbook requested. You therefore choose unscented tapers and keep the flowers restrained. Even guests' personal perfume must be considered, though it cannot be managed in advance. By 7:30 the room may contain several fragrances layered together: powder cologne, tobacco flowers, candle wax, and food. The ideal effect is warmth. The actual effect depends partly on ventilation. A window may be opened briefly before arrival, but once the candles are lit, draughts become enemies. One cold current can bend the flames, scatter smoke, and send wax down the holders. The room must breathe without appearing to breathe. Once again, the house is expected to perform a biological function discreetly. Centerpieces also reveal class and access. Wealthier homes might order elaborate arrangements, use silver epergnes or crystal bowls, and rely on domestic staff to trim stems, polish containers, replace water, and clear fallen petals. A middle-income hostess might reproduce the look with grocery store flowers, garden clippings, or a borrowed vase. In homes where money was tight, decoration could come from seasonal branches, fruit leaves, homemade candles, or no centerpiece at all. A clean cloth and a generous meal could carry more meaning than any floral display. Regional customs mattered. Rural households might use what grew nearby. Church suppers and family gatherings might favor practical tables without formal decoration. Some households avoided candles for safety cost or religious reasons. Others saved them for holidays. Mainstream magazines often presented one polished version of gracious living, usually built around a white middle-class home with space, matching furnishings, and enough time to arrange flowers before changing clothes. The image was attractive, but it concealed the fact that beauty required money, labor, knowledge, and room to store the objects that produced it. Still, people took genuine pleasure in making a table lovely. A vase of flowers could be a creative act, a welcome, or a small luxury in an ordinary week. The pressure did not erase the pleasure. It merely stood very close beside it. At 6 o'clock the centerpiece is complete. The flowers spread low across the glass bowl. The candle stands straight. The table looks warmer now, less like an inventory of possessions and more like a place where people might actually enjoy one another. You lower the dining room lights and imagine the flames reflected in the glassware. For a moment the effect is beautiful. Then one flower slips forward and touches a candle. You move it back. Another stem follows. The arrangement, apparently offended by supervision, has begun to expand. You remove 2 flowers, trim one stem, and rotate the bowl. Balance returns. Nothing blocks the view. Nothing drips. Nothing leans. Nothing is currently on fire. By domestic standards, this is a complete success. But the hostess herself still smells faintly of onions, furniture polish, and warm kitchen air. Her hair has softened, her apron is marked, and the first guests will arrive soon. The table is dressed. Now she must become the woman who could have arranged it without breaking a sweat. The hostess dress had one essential duty: it must deny that cooking had happened. At 6:15 the dining table is ready, the flowers have been persuaded to remain below eye level, and the kitchen carries the unmistakable atmosphere of organized survival. Steam clouds the window above the sink. A roasting pan occupies the oven. Butter has marked the edge of the counter. Flour rests in a pale fingerprint near the mixing bowl. You meanwhile smell faintly of onions, warm fat, furniture polish, and the determination required to keep 8 adults fed on schedule. None of this may accompany you into the living room. The guests are expected to encounter a woman who appears fresh, composed, and pleasantly surprised that dinner has somehow prepared itself. She must look as though she spent the afternoon arranging flowers, not lifting pans, scrubbing potatoes, checking the clock, and opening the oven door often enough to develop a personal relationship with the roast. The house may reveal abundance. The hostess must reveal no effort. Her dress becomes the final curtain drawn across the labor of the day. Until now, you have been working in a house dress protected by an apron. The house dress is practical, washable, and forgiving of small disasters. It allows movement between sink, stove, pantry, and dining room without requiring anyone to believe that domestic work is glamorous. The apron has taken the worst of the afternoon: a drop of sauce, a streak of flour, a damp mark from the sink, and perhaps one dark spot whose origin is now beyond investigation. Before the doorbell rings, both garments must disappear. The apron is removed first and hung behind the kitchen door where no guest will see it unless lost or unusually curious. The house dress follows. It may be perfectly respectable for ordinary hours, but tonight requires something that announces social readiness. You carry the chosen dress from the bedroom closet still on its hanger and hold it against yourself before the mirror. It must be formal enough for company, but not so formal that the guests feel underdressed. It should look attractive without appearing vain, fashionable without looking expensive, and comfortable without actually being comfortable. The correct dress says that this evening matters, though apparently not enough to cause perspiration. The fabric and cut depend on the household, the season, the region, and what the woman owns. A fitted waist and fuller skirt may create the polished silhouette associated with the decade's fashionable ideal. A straighter dress may be more practical or modern. A dark colour can hide small marks, though candlelight may make it severe. A pale dress looks fresh, but one careless spoonful of gravy can give it a permanent memory of the evening. Short sleeves may be suitable in warm weather. Three-quarter sleeves can look elegant while staying clear of serving dishes. A neckline must be flattering without inviting comment. The hem must allow movement between table and kitchen, though not enough movement to suggest that movement has been considered. Beneath the dress may be a girdle slip brassiere stockings and perhaps a crinoline or petticoat depending on the style. These layers create the intended shape before the dress is even buttoned. The finished effect is smooth. The construction process is less spiritual. You pull, fasten, straighten and adjust while the kitchen timer rings downstairs. Fashion has entered negotiations with dinner. Stockings present their own quiet risk. A run discovered at 6:30 can redirect the emotional course of the evening. You sit on the edge of the bed and inspect each leg beneath the lamp. The seams, if the stockings have them, must appear straight. A crooked seam suggests haste, though haste is precisely what has placed it there. The garters must hold securely without pinching so sharply that sitting through dinner becomes an endurance exercise. Shoes are chosen for appearance, not for the number of miles the hostess will walk between the kitchen, dining room and living room. Low heels may be sensible, but the evening dress may seem to require something more graceful. Higher heels improve the silhouette while making the kitchen floor feel increasingly theoretical. You test a pair on the bedroom carpet, then step into the hallway and immediately remember that you must stand for much of the next 4 hours. A second pair is considered. The first pair looks better. The first pair wins. Beauty has defeated circulation by a narrow but traditional margin. Hair requires repair rather than complete reconstruction. The style prepared earlier in the day has softened near the stove, loosened around the temples, and absorbed enough kitchen warmth to develop its own weather. You stand before the dresser mirror with hairpins, a comb and a can of spray. A loose section is smoothed back. A curl is restored with your finger. The shape must survive greetings, cooking, heat, cigarette smoke, and the possibility that someone opens a window. If the hair has been set carefully, it should appear controlled without looking rigid, though the amount of spray involved may suggest structural reinforcement. Makeup follows. Powder reduces shine. Lipstick brings colour back to a face that has spent the afternoon near an oven. Rouge, mascara and eyebrow pencil may be added according to habitage means and personal preference. The goal is not necessarily transformation, it is restoration. The hostess is expected to emerge looking like the woman who began the day, only more finished, and with no visible awareness that several dishes are approaching critical moments downstairs. She checks her teeth, smooths the neckline and listens. The oven door closes below. Her husband is in the kitchen. This may or may not be reassuring. Jewellery must be chosen with restraint. Pearls are associated with the polished middle-class ideal, but not every woman owns them, wears them, or considers them appropriate. A brooch, small earrings, a bracelet, or a wedding ring may be enough. Jewellery should complete the dress without catching on an apron string later when the hostess quietly returns to the kitchen. A bracelet that strikes a serving bowl during a pause in conversation becomes louder than expected. Long earrings may be fashionable, but the hostess will be bending, reaching and turning quickly. A necklace should remain where it belongs when she leans over the table to collect a plate. The evening bag is unnecessary inside her own home, though lipstick and a handkerchief may be placed where they can be reached discreetly. Perfume is applied lightly. Too much fragrance will join the flowers, food, tobacco and cologne, already waiting to compete in the dining room. The ideal scent is noticeable only when someone stands close. The ideal hostess apparently must control not only her appearance, but the radius at which she can be detected. The transformation also depends on time, money and help. A wealthier hostess may have spent the afternoon supervising rather than doing every task herself. A domestic worker may have prepared ingredients, cleaned rooms, washed pans, or remained in the kitchen during dinner, allowing the woman of the house to dress without listening for boiling water. In many homes, that labour was performed by black women whose skill made white middle and upper class ease possible, while their own working conditions, wages, and family responsibilities remained largely invisible to the guests. A middle-income hostess without help must create the same appearance through speed and planning. A working wife may have returned from an office or shop before beginning dinner preparations, compressing an entire day's domestic performance into the hours after paid employment. A woman with young children may dress while answering questions through the bedroom door. A rural hostess may be carrying food from a larger kitchen garden, or managing household work that began before sunrise. Some women dislike fashionable restriction and choose simpler clothes. Some enjoy dressing beautifully and take genuine pleasure in the ritual. The pressure is not that every woman feels the same. It is that the public ideal leaves little room for anyone to look tired. At 6:45 you return downstairs. The dress changes the way you move. The skirt brushes the hallway wall. The shoes strike the floor with a sharper sound. The kitchen, which looked manageable in an apron, now appears full of substances capable of ruining an evening. You cover the front of the dress with a clean apron, but this one must be removed before anyone sees you. The roast is checked. The sauce is stirred. Rolls wait beneath a cloth. A drop of something lands near your wrist and is wiped away immediately. You lift the lid from a pot, leaning back to protect your face from steam, while trying not to disturb your hair. Domestic labour has not ended. It has merely become more dangerous to the costume. Your husband enters in a clean suit, adjusts his tie, and asks whether there is anything he can do. The question arrives 15 minutes before the guests, which gives it the ceremonial quality of a ribbon cutting. You ask him to fill the ice bucket, arrange the bottles, and make certain the living room ashtrays contain matches. He nods, pleased to have received a mission with visible equipment. Then the doorbell rings early. For 1 second the house stops. The roast continues cooking. The candles remain unlit. Your apron is still tied. One shoe has acquired a faint splash near the toe. Your husband looks toward the hallway, then toward you, awaiting instructions from the person officially expected to look as though instructions are unnecessary. You untie the apron, fold it quickly, and place it out of sight. Powder is checked in the small mirror near the telephone. The splash on the shoe is hidden beneath the hem. You smooth the dress, straighten your shoulders, and move toward the living room while your husband opens the door. By the time the guests see you, your expression is warm and unhurried. You welcome them as though you have spent the last hour sitting beside the flowers. The kitchen heat remains on your skin, the oven timer is approaching, and a pan waits in the sink. None of it crosses the threshold with you. The hostess has arrived. Now the host must begin the cocktail hour and perform his own, considerably shorter portion of the evening. The husband's role as host began at the precise moment when most of the work was already finished. He entered the living room in a clean suit, checked that his tie was straight, and took command of the ice bucket with the calm authority of a man arriving near the end of a military campaign to accept the surrender. The floors had been vacuumed, the furniture polished, the invitations managed, the menu balanced, the silver counted, the flowers trimmed, and the hostess reconstructed from a woman who had spent the afternoon over a stove into someone who appeared to have been waiting peacefully beside the radio. Now her husband became the public face of welcome. He opened the door, took coats, when convenient shook hands and guided guests toward the drinks. This division could look natural because the most visible tasks were assigned to him after the least visible tasks had been assigned to her. He did not usually need to know whether the roles had risen, whether the sauce was separating, or whether the good napkins were hiding a faint stain. He needed to know where the bourbon was. The arrangement was not universal, and many husbands helped far more than the magazine suggested, but the familiar middle-class ideal gave the man a short sociable performance, while the woman remained responsible for the entire machinery behind it. The cocktail station had been prepared in advance, often on a sideboard bar cart tray, or cleared section of cabinet. Bottles stood beside highball glasses, cocktail glasses, a metal shaker, a measuring glass, napkins, stirring spoons, and a bowl of ice that was already beginning its slow return to water. Whiskey gin, vermouth, soda, ginger ale tonic or fruit juice might be offered, depending on the household, the region, the guests, and the budget. Olives, cherries, lemon twists, or small wedges of lime provided decoration, and the suggestion that the drink had not simply been poured but composed. The male host was expected to ask each guest what he or she would like, remember the answer long enough to prepare it, and avoid making the first drink so strong that the evening completed its emotional journey before dinner. He might know one or two standard mixtures well, and approach every other request as a personal challenge. A highball was manageable. Whiskey and soda required no advanced education. A martini introduced ratios, temperature, and opinions. Guests who cared deeply about whether the drink had been shaken, stirred dry, very dry, or merely threatened with vermouth, could transform the first 10 minutes into a technical conference. The wife had already done much of the preparation for this apparently masculine ritual. She had purchased or approved the liquor, washed the glasses, polished the tray, cut the lemon, filled the olive dish, found the bottle opener, counted the napkins, and made sure there was enough ice. Ice carried particular importance. It had to be plentiful, clean and ready before the first guest arrived. Too little, and the host would begin rationing cubes with the strained generosity of a relief administrator. Too much could occupy valuable freezer space already needed for dessert. If the refrigerator produced ice slowly, trays had been filled hours earlier, loosened beneath running water and emptied into a bucket. A cube escaping across the kitchen floor had to be retrieved before it melted into evidence. By the time the husband lifted the tongs and dropped ice into a glass, the cube had already completed a long domestic biography. He received the satisfying clink. She had managed the freezing, cracking, storing, and possibility that a child would steal half the supply for a glass of lemonade. This was considered division of labour, though the division had been arranged with interesting geometry. Introductions were also part of the host's responsibility, particularly when guests did not know one another. A name alone was not always enough. He might offer a small connection. One man worked in insurance, another had recently returned from a trip, one couple had moved from another state, another shared an interest in gardening or golf. The goal was to give conversation somewhere to begin, without revealing anything private, awkward, or likely to produce argument. Titles and surnames mattered more in many social settings than they do now, especially when age rank, work, or unfamiliarity created distance. The husband's supervisor might be addressed more formally than an old friend. His wife must be welcomed with equal attention, not treated as an accessory delivered beside him. The host was expected to circulate, make sure no one stood alone, and prevent one guest from capturing the room with a story that had already survived several previous dinners. If conversation weakened, he could ask a safe question, offer another drink, or direct attention toward a new arrival. He was not merely pouring liquor. He was warming the social engine before the meal, preferably without causing it to overheat. The hostess moved through the same room under different rules. She welcomed each couple, admired a dress, accepted compliments about the house, and watched the clock without appearing to look at it. She monitored the drinks while listening for sounds from the kitchen. A faint rattle might be the heating system. It might also be a lid approaching rebellion. She noticed who had finished a glass, who had barely touched one, who required ginger ale, and who should perhaps not be offered a third refill before eating. She could not openly supervise her husband's pouring without embarrassing him, but she might catch his eye move an empty glass out of reach, or announce that dinner would be ready shortly. While he discussed automobiles or business, she carried a tray of canapes, replenished nuts, and calculated whether the late guests had enough time to arrive before the main course lost its dignity. The cocktail hour was presented as a pause before dinner. For her, it was a corridor between two forms of work. She entered the living room, smiling, returned to the kitchen, moving quickly, and reappeared before anyone had time to notice the change in speed. Drinks followed gendered expectations, though actual preferences were far more varied than the stereotypes. Advertising often pictured men with whiskey bourbon or strong highballs, and women with lighter, sweeter, or more decorative drinks. A man ordering something associated with women might attract teasing. A woman asking for a strong drink might be judged more closely than a man making the same request. Yet real guests drank what they liked, abstained, accepted something merely to be polite, or held one glass for most of the evening. The hostess needed alternatives that did not make abstinence feel like a public statement. Ginger ale soda, tomato juice, fruit juice, coffee, or plain water could be offered without interrogation. Religious practice, pregnancy, illness, medication, recovery, personal taste and family custom all affected what people drank, though several of these subjects were not necessarily discussed openly. A considerate host did not demand an explanation. Nothing for me should have been sufficient. In practice, some guests still asked why. Etiquette could provide rules, but it could not always prevent curiosity from putting on a necktie and joining the party. Smoking often joined the cocktail hour, adding another layer of equipment and attention. Ashtrays had been placed on the tables. Matches or a lighter waited nearby. Cigarettes might be offered from a box or case, and the host could light one for a guest as a gesture of courtesy. Soon, pale smoke gathered beneath the lamp, softening the room while attaching itself to curtains, upholstery, hair, and every freshly cleaned surface. In many gatherings, smoking was ordinary enough to require little comment. In others, it was discouraged, limited, or absent. The hostess still had to anticipate it. An ashtray too far away encouraged ash to fall elsewhere. One too small filled quickly. A careless cigarette left on the rim could burn the furniture or produce a dark mark on the table the morning after. The host might empty an ashtray if necessary, though the wife had usually decided where the clean replacements were stored. Hospitality asked the room to absorb smoke, conversation, perfume, laughter, and the occasional disagreement while continuing to look orderly. The living room had been polished into respectability that afternoon. By the first round of drinks, it was already acquiring a new history. The cocktail hour also served a practical purpose. It protected dinner from the imperfections of time. Guests did not arrive simultaneously. One couple might appear 10 minutes early, another exactly on schedule, and the Harrisons eventually 20 minutes late. Drinks and small foods allowed these differences to be absorbed without everyone sitting at the table staring at an empty chair. They gave the kitchen a few additional minutes if the roast required them, and gave the hostess somewhere to place people while making those minutes look intentional. But the pause could not continue indefinitely. Canapés too generous would spoil appetites. Drinks refilled too freely could loosen conversation beyond repair. A delay that felt pleasant at first could begin to feel like evidence that something had gone wrong behind the swinging door. The hostess watched the hands of the mantel clock. 7:40 became 7:50. The roast was ready. The vegetables were nearing the edge of cooperation. Her husband, now enjoying a story from accounting, poured another round as though dinner were a rumour. She crossed the room, rested a hand lightly on his arm, and said that they would be going in very shortly. The sentence was gentle. The instruction was complete. At last the late couple arrived with apologies, cold air, and a new demand for introductions. The husband took their coats and mixed their drinks. The wife welcomed them warmly while privately revising the temperature of every dish in the dining room. For a few minutes more the scene worked exactly as intended. Men and women stood beneath the soft lamps with glasses in hand. The record player murmured. Ice clicked. Cigarette smoke curled above the ashtrays. The host appeared relaxed and capable. The hostess appeared relaxed and capable. One of them was. The other was listening for the oven, counting occupied glasses, remembering who had not yet met whom, and wondering whether the sauce could survive another 5 minutes. Then she gave the signal. Her husband set down the bottle, raised his voice just enough to gather the room, and announced that dinner was served. The guest turned toward the dining room. His public duty had reached its finest moment. He'd informed everyone that the meal existed. In the kitchen, the woman who had caused it to exist removed her apron once more. The invisible maid was expected to arrive precisely when the visible hostess could no longer be in 2 rooms at once. She would take the guests' coats, refresh the cocktail tray, carry the first course, remove the empty plates, watch the coffee, wash the pans, and somehow remain discreet enough that the evening still appeared to be the personal achievement of the woman of the house. In wealthier homes, such a worker might actually exist: a live-in maid, a cook, a housekeeper, or a woman hired by the day to clean and assist with company. In many middle-income homes, however, the maid was present only as an assumption built into the etiquette. The hostess read instructions written for a household with extra hands, then quietly performed those hands herself. She entered the living room as mistress of the house returned to the kitchen, as cook reappeared with the tray, as waitress removed the plates, as busboy washed them as dishwasher, and came back carrying coffee, as though she had spent the previous 10 minutes discussing theatre. The costume changed only slightly. The smile did not. A formal dinner was designed around the comforting idea that labour could disappear through a doorway. When no employee stood behind that doorway, the hostess had to disappear instead. The difficulty began with service. Food prepared in the kitchen needed to reach the dining room hot arranged and apparently untouched by panic. If a maid were present, the hostess could sit with her guests while each course arrived. Without one, she had to decide whether to serve from the table-pass dishes among the guests, arrange plates in the kitchen, or carry in large platters, and hope everyone understood the method without instruction. Family-style service was practical and warm, but it might appear too informal for a dinner involving the husband's supervisor. Individual plates looked elegant, though 8 plates required space timing, and enough hands to carry them before the vegetables cooled. A serving cart could help if the house owned one and the hallway permitted it. Otherwise, the hostess carried 2 plates at a time, walking carefully in heels, while the remaining 6 waited in the kitchen and reconsidered their temperature. She could ask her husband to help, but the polished ideal often treated his place at the table as fixed and hers as negotiable. He sustained conversation. She sustained everything else. The distinction was subtle enough to be called tradition. You stand beside the swinging kitchen door and listen to the guests settling into their assigned chairs. The roast rests on its platter. Steam rises from the vegetables. The gravy has reached the dangerous stage at which 1 minute of neglect may change its character. A clean apron covers the front of your dinner dress, and a folded towel lies over one forearm because the serving platter is hot enough to revise your fingerprints. Before entering, you remove the apron, smooth the skirt, lift the platter, and arrange your expression. The door swings open. Conversation pauses while you carry the main course toward the table. This is the moment when the work must become presentation. The platter should be held securely but not clutched. You should move carefully but not slowly. You should accept compliments without suggesting that compliments are necessary for survival. Then the platter is placed the roast admired, and the hostess takes her seat. She has perhaps 30 seconds before remembering that the rolls remain in the oven. She excuses herself, lightly walks to the kitchen and accelerates as soon as the door closes. The rolls are rescued, transferred into a lined basket and brought out beneath a folded napkin. Nobody must know they were nearly converted into building material. A real household employee could prevent these small emergencies, but her presence created another set of rules. Instructions were supposed to be clear, calm, and given before the guests arrived. The worker needed to know the menu, serving order, seating arrangement, location of extra silver, and whether anyone required something different. Correcting her publicly could embarrass everyone, especially the worker, though some employers did it anyway. Calling across the room was inelegant. A glance, a quiet word, or a household bell might be used in homes equipped for formal service. Yet the ideal of silent coordination depended on preparation and familiarity. A woman hired only for the evening might not know which cabinet held the cups, or which guest was supposed to receive the plate without onions. The hostess therefore had to train, supervise, and anticipate while appearing liberated from the work. Paid help did not remove domestic management. It changed the form of it. The woman of the house was expected to know how service should proceed even when another woman carried it out. Her competence was judged by the employee's performance, while the employee's skill was often treated as part of the furniture. The employment itself was considerably less graceful than the dining room suggested. Federal records of the period classified private household workers separately from many other service employees, and contemporary labour reports showed that domestic service was overwhelmingly women's work. Housekeepers, cooks, cleaners, laundresses, and childcare workers performed demanding physical labour in private homes, where hours, duties, and boundaries could be difficult to regulate. Many domestic workers lacked protections available in other occupations, and the isolation of working inside a private household made poor conditions harder to see. Black women were especially concentrated in domestic employment in many regions, because racial discrimination closed off better paid and more secure forms of work. A white hostess might be praised for the serenity of a dinner made possible by a black worker who had cooked, cleaned, travelled across town, and perhaps left her own children in someone else's care. The guests saw a smooth household. They rarely saw the unequal labour market supporting it. The polished silver reflected the room very clearly. It did not reflect the entire system. Relationships between household employers and workers varied widely. Some were formal and distant. Some became affectionate, complicated, or deeply interdependent. Some employers paid fairly and treated workers with respect. Others expected long hours, added tasks without additional pay, or described an employee as one of the family while carefully excluding her from the family's security and authority. That phrase could express genuine attachment, but it could also blur the difference between affection and employment. A worker might be trusted with children, keys, meals, private conversations, and the daily functioning of the home, while still being required to enter through a different door, eat separately, or remain nearly invisible when company arrived. Regional customs, household income, race, immigration background, and whether the employee lived in or came by the day, all shaped the arrangement. The dinner party compressed these contradictions into a few hours. The maid was close enough to hear every conversation, and socially distant enough to be treated as though she heard none. She knew which guest returned a plate untouched, which husband drank too quickly, and which marriage became tense after dessert. Domestic service demanded physical work, emotional restraint, and an impressive ability to carry private knowledge without dropping it beside the gravy boat. In a home without paid help, the hostess imitated not only the maid's tasks, but her invisibility. She tried to clear plates without interrupting conversation, replenish water without drawing attention, and enter the kitchen before anyone noticed that something was missing. She stacked dishes quietly, though china has its own opinions about silence. She scraped plates, checked dessert, rinsed serving spoons, and listened through the door for the rise and fall of voices. If laughter came from the dining room while she stood alone beside the sink, it could produce a small emotional contradiction. The party was hers, but she was repeatedly absent from it. She had chosen the guests, prepared the room, cooked the meal, and arranged the table, yet the evening itself continued whenever she left. Her husband might later describe the dinner as a great success, and recount a story told during the exact 5 minutes when she was removing 8 plates and attempting to locate the dessert forks. The hospitality was genuine. So was the possibility that the hostess experienced her own gathering mainly in fragments. Practical hostesses found ways to reduce the disappearing act. They chose dishes that could remain warm, served food, family-style used buffet arrangements, prepared dessert in advance, or accepted help from a sister neighbor, older child, or willing guest. Some husbands carved the meat, carried plates, mixed drinks, or washed dishes afterward, regardless of what idealized advertisements implied. Informal entertaining grew partly because formality required so much labor. A buffet allowed guests to serve themselves. A backyard supper tolerated paper napkins, simpler dishes, and movement between kitchen and yard. A casserole could arrive at the table in the same vessel in which it had cooked, eliminating one serving platter and the associated ceremony. Modern tableware and simplified entertaining guides encouraged the belief that hospitality could be generous without reproducing hotel service inside a suburban house. Yet older standards remained powerful, especially when the evening involved business relationships, older relatives, or guests whose judgment mattered. The hostess could simplify, but she had to make simplification appear stylish rather than necessary. Even freedom required attractive presentation. By the end of the main course, the invisible maid has completed another shift. She has carried food, replaced spoons, wiped a splash from the kitchen floor, rescued the rolls, warmed the gravy, and removed the empty platter. She's also seated at the table in lipstick and pearls, asking Mrs. Harrison about her garden. When the last guest places a fork across the plate, you recognize the signal and rise. Your husband continues the conversation while you gather the dishes. One guest offers to help. Etiquette encourages you to refuse at least once because allowing a guest into the kitchen may expose the pans, the apron, and the reality that dinner has left wreckage. She offers again. You decide whether kindness is stronger than appearances. For now you smile and say that everything is under control. It is a generous statement. It is also fiction. You carry the first stack through the swinging door and set it beside a sink already crowded with evidence. Dessert is waiting in the refrigerator. Coffee must be started. The dining room expects your return, and before you can become the hostess again, the maid you do not employ has several more things to do. The first 5 minutes of a dinner party could determine whether the entire evening felt elegant, strained, or quietly doomed. The doorbell rings, the host opens the door, and suddenly every hour of preparation is compressed into one narrow hallway. Cold air enters with the guests. Coats rustle. Gloves are removed. A hat must be accepted without crushing it. An umbrella placed somewhere it cannot drip onto the floor, and several people greeted in the correct order while the hostess tries to remember whether the rolls are still in the oven. Nobody has tasted the food. Nobody has sat at the carefully arranged table. Yet judgments have already begun. The guests notice the porch light, the shine on the hall floor, the smell coming from the kitchen, the temperature of the house, the host's tie, the hostess's dress, and whether their names are greeted with confidence. The hosts notice whether the guests are early, late, overdressed, underdressed, carrying flowers, carrying nothing, or carrying an unexpected person. Everyone smiles. Everyone says how lovely it is to see everyone else. This is not necessarily false. People may genuinely be pleased, but friendliness and observation can occupy the same room quite comfortably. Coats create the first practical problem because many modest homes do not possess an entrance hall designed to receive 8 adults in winter clothing. A small closet may already contain the family's coats, children's jackets, a vacuum attachment, and one item nobody recognizes but no one has thrown away. The guests' garments must go somewhere clean, safe, and out of sight. The master bedroom often becomes the temporary cloakroom. This arrangement sounds simple until you realize that strangers are about to enter the most private room in the house, place expensive clothing on the bed, and perhaps glance around while doing so. The bedspread must be smooth. The bedside table must be cleared. Medicine bottles, personal letters, laundry hairpins, and anything suggesting that 2 ordinary people actually sleep there should disappear into drawers. The bedroom does not need to be displayed, but it must be ready for accidental inspection. Women may be guided there to remove hats, repair lipstick, or use the mirror. Men's overcoats may be carried in by the host. If several guests arrive together, the bed gradually disappears beneath wool fur raincoats, scarves, and handbags. The room becomes a soft geological formation of other people's possessions. Somewhere near the bottom lies the hostess's pillow, now participating in society. Receiving a coat is itself a small act of choreography. The host should step forward before the guest begins struggling with sleeves alone. A woman may turn slightly while her coat is eased from her shoulders, revealing the dress chosen for the evening. The hostess offers a compliment that should sound immediate rather than compulsory. The guest may return one about the house, the flowers, or the hostess's appearance. Within seconds, both women have acknowledged each other's preparation without discussing the labour behind it. Gloves are folded. A small evening bag remains with the guest unless she prefers to leave it in the bedroom. Hats require particular care. A structured hat cannot simply be dropped beneath an overcoat without emerging as modern sculpture. A fur stole, if present, must be placed where it will not slide to the floor or acquire someone else's perfume. Wet coats must not be laid directly on the good bedspread, though asking guests to keep wearing them would be equally unhelpful. Towels, hangers, and spare space must have been prepared. Hospitality means anticipating water-wool vanity and gravity before any of them create a scene. The bedroom visit allows another kind of inspection. A female guest standing before the dresser mirror may notice the quality of the furniture, the neatness of the room, the cosmetics arranged on the surface, or the absence of anything arranged at all. She may touch up her lipstick beneath the lamp, smooth her hair, and exchange a few quiet words with another woman before returning downstairs. These words can set the emotional temperature of the evening. A dress may be admired. A late arrival may be explained. A difficult guest may be mentioned in a tone that technically contains no criticism. The hostess, if she accompanies them, must remain warm, while also listening for the doorbell and the kitchen timer. If she does not accompany them, she must trust that the room contains nothing capable of starting a new conversation. A drawer left open by a child can become an exhibit. A pile of mending can reveal that domestic life continues even in respectable households. A bottle of sleeping tablets, a letter, or a photograph may invite questions that good manners should prevent, but curiosity may still produce. The bedroom is not officially part of the party. This is precisely why it must be prepared. Back downstairs, introductions begin. The host names each guest clearly, but introductions are not only about names. They place people within a social map. This is Mr. Harrison from the office. This is Mrs. Harrison. This is the couple from across the street. This is the old friend from church. A few useful details are offered to give the conversation a place to land. One guest enjoys gardening. Another has recently visited Chicago. Two men may know the same company. Two women may have children of similar ages. The host tries to create connection without exposing anyone to a subject they would rather avoid. The hostess watches faces. Does one name produce recognition? Does another produce a pause? Have two guests already met under circumstances nobody mentioned? A successful introduction should make everyone feel included while revealing just enough to keep them speaking. Too little information leaves people standing beside the piano with nothing but weather. Too much information turns the host into a public records office. The correct amount is small, useful, and safe. Appearance is judged in the same quick, quiet manner. A guest who arrives too formally dressed may make the hostess feel plain. A guest who arrives too casually may suggest that the occasion has not been taken seriously. The men's suits are easier to compare without appearing to compare them. The women's dresses, shoes, jewellery, gloves, and hair invite more detailed attention. These observations are not always cruel. They can be affectionate, admiring, or simply part of the social vocabulary of the time. Clothing tells people whether the evening is important, whether the wearer understands the setting, and whether the household belongs to the same social world. A new dress may attract praise. An old dress may pass unnoticed if it is well chosen and well kept. A woman with limited money may rely on one reliable evening outfit, changing the brooch belt or earrings to create variety. A working woman may have dressed quickly after a long day. A mother may have left a child with a sitter and arrived already tired. None of this appears immediately. What appears is the finished surface. The rule is not merely to look good. It is to look appropriate, which is a more demanding and less measurable task. The house receives similar judgment. Guests notice whether the rooms are warm enough but not overheated. They notice whether the living room smells of polish flowers, dinner tobacco, or something less intentional. They see the furniture arrangement, the books, the family photographs, the new television, and the absence of toys. A compliment on the curtains may be sincere, but it may also confirm that the curtains have been examined. A question about the sofa may lead to its price. Manufacturer or how recently it was purchased subjects that polite conversation is supposed to approach carefully, while still somehow approaching them. The hostess must accept compliments modestly. She should not list the cost of every object or explain the full battle required to clean it. Thank you, we enjoy it is safer than it took me all morning to remove grape jelly from that cushion. Pride is acceptable. Visible effort is less fashionable. The home should seem cared for rather than defended. Small mistakes during arrival can grow quickly. An early guest may catch the hostess in an apron. A late guest may interrupt the move to the dining room. A husband may forget a name. Two identical dark coats may be placed together and later exchanged, creating confusion at departure. Someone may bring flowers, requiring the hostess to find a vase immediately, while pretending that the kitchen contains unlimited clean containers. Someone may bring candy or wine, introducing uncertainty about whether it should be served that evening. A guest may arrive with a child because the sitter failed to appear. Another may ask to use the telephone. One woman may need a safety pin. One man may track rain across the floor. None of these problems is serious, but each demands a response that protects the guest from embarrassment. The gracious hostess does not announce the inconvenience. She finds a towel, a vase, a chair, a glass, a telephone, a pin, and perhaps an entire emergency supper for a child. Her skill is measured partly by how little anyone notices that a problem occurred. By the time everyone reaches the living room, the first inspection is complete. Coats are buried safely beneath one another upstairs. Hats have survived. Names have been exchanged. Dresses have been admired. The house has been observed and found, at least publicly, delightful. The guests now hold drinks and begin settling into the chairs selected for them long before they arrived. The hostess moves among them with a plate of canapés, still listening to the room beneath the conversation. She has learned who arrived tense, who arrived hungry, who is already speaking too loudly and who may need rescue from the corner near the radio. The first 5 minutes have given her the evening's earliest intelligence. She knows where the social weather is gathering. All that remains is to keep everyone pleasantly occupied until dinner, which requires small food, small napkins, and the careful management of a delay that must never feel like waiting. The canapé was a small piece of food carrying an unreasonable amount of responsibility. It had to keep guests occupied without satisfying them, complement the drinks without creating stains, and suggest abundance without revealing that the main course was still negotiating with the oven. By 8 o'clock the living room is full. Coats have been moved upstairs, glasses have been filled, and conversation has divided into several small circles beneath the lamps. The guests believe they are enjoying a relaxed interval before dinner. You know that the interval exists partly because the roast needed another 15 minutes. A tray of canapés therefore enters the room not merely as refreshment, but as a diplomatic instrument. Each piece must be small enough to eat in 1 or 2 bites, firm enough to survive the journey from tray to mouth, and tidy enough not to drop mayonnaise onto a cocktail dress. Crackers carry cheese spreads, smoked fish, chopped egg, or carefully arranged vegetables. Small toast points support mixtures that have been chilled, seasoned, and persuaded to remain where they were placed. Nuts, olives, celery, radishes, and cheese cubes wait in shallow dishes. The effect should be casual. The preparation was not. The ideal cocktail food could be eaten while standing speaking and holding a glass, which meant it had to cooperate with a guest who possessed only one free hand. This eliminated anything requiring a knife, a plate, or a private consultation with a napkin. A canapé that fractured on the first bite could scatter crumbs across the carpet. One overloaded with filling might tilt at the exact moment the guest turned to greet someone. A stuffed olive could escape from a toothpick and roll beneath the sofa where it would join the crayon and 2 pennies removed that morning. The hostess tests these possibilities before serving. She lifts one piece, takes a careful bite, and observes whether the topping remains attached. If it slides, the entire tray must be reconsidered. The bread may be too soft. The spread may be too warm. The garnish may possess ambitions beyond its assigned position. Food intended to look effortless requires engineering. By the time the tray reaches the living room, every small square has been trimmed, spread decorated, chilled, and arranged in concentric order. Guests see a snack. The kitchen remembers a production line. Cocktail napkins stand nearby, small and decorative, prepared to absorb the consequences. Paper napkins have the advantage of convenience and can be purchased in colours or patterns suited to the room. Cloth napkins look more formal, but create additional laundry, and must be folded neatly enough to justify their presence. Either kind should be easy to reach before a guest needs one. Placed too far from the food, they become decorative objects rather than equipment. Placed beneath every canapé, they may be mistaken for tiny plates and carried around the room until no clean napkins remain. The hostess circulates with the tray, and watches guests perform the awkward exchange glass into left-hand canapé, taken with right napkin, pinched beneath 2 fingers, conversation continuing throughout. Someone inevitably holds a cigarette as well, turning a simple appetizer into a demonstration of human adaptability. The guest smiles, balances 4 objects, and assures everyone that the food is delicious. The hostess smiles back while calculating whether the ash is approaching the cheese spread. Civilized society has produced many complicated rituals. Few are more ambitious than asking a person to eat drink smoke, greet strangers, and protect the upholstery simultaneously. Quantity creates another delicate problem. Too few canapés suggest poor planning and leave hungry guests watching the kitchen door. Too many reduce appetite and threaten the dinner prepared at much greater expense. The hostess cannot simply place all the food out at once and hope nature establishes balance. She may offer 1 tray, allow it to circulate, then wait before bringing another. Nuts and olives can remain available, though certain guests will station themselves beside them with the quiet concentration of workers assigned to inventory reduction. One man takes a handful of salted nuts every time he passes the table. A woman who claimed not to be hungry accepts 4 cheese canapés because each one is very small and therefore apparently exists outside arithmetic. The husband from accounting has discovered the stuffed celery and praises it at length perhaps because praise allows him to take another piece. You watch the dishes diminish and decide whether to replenish them. The dinner is almost ready. Almost is one of the longest words in the hostess's vocabulary. The delay before dinner must be managed through atmosphere. If guests begin asking when the meal will be served, the interval has failed. Music helps, drinks help, conversation helps most of all. The host should keep people engaged, introduce new subjects, and prevent anyone from studying the mantel clock. The hostess can announce that dinner will be ready shortly, but shortly must remain believable. 5 minutes feels reassuring. 25 begins to sound theological. She moves through the room asking questions, connecting guests, and gently steering conversation away from silence. A recent trip, a new automobile, a garden, a school event, a popular film, or a change in the neighborhood can carry several minutes if handled well. Politics may be dangerous. Money is impolite. Health complaints can expand without warning. Children are safe until 2 parents disagree about discipline. The hostess does not need to control every word, but she must notice when a subject is approaching trouble. A fresh tray can interrupt an argument. A refill can rescue a pause. The announcement that dinner is nearly ready can end almost anything. Meanwhile, the kitchen continues to operate beyond the swinging door. The roast rests beneath foil. The vegetables wait over low heat. The sauce is stirred to prevent a surface from forming. Rolls warm in the oven. The salad remains chilled because dressing it too early will produce surrender. Every return to the kitchen requires a change in speed. In the living room you move smoothly, shoulders relaxed, voice gentle. Beyond the door you lift lids, adjust burners, wipe plates, and issue whispered instructions to your husband if he's followed you far enough to be useful. Then you stop, breathe, remove the apron, and return carrying another tray. The door divides not only 2 rooms, but 2 versions of the same woman. On one side, she's enjoying her guests. On the other, she's calculating the survival time of green beans. The guests may hear a faint clatter and politely ignore it. Good manners often involve agreeing not to notice the machinery that supports one's comfort. Prepared foods and branded recipes offered useful shortcuts, especially as post-war manufacturers promoted spreads, crackers, canned fish, processed cheese soups, sauces, and packaged mixes as modern aids to entertaining. A hostess could open, blend, chill, and garnish ingredients rather than preparing every component from the beginning. This did save time. It also expanded expectations by making a wider variety of small foods appear achievable. Convenience rarely arrived alone. It brought photographs. The photographs showed trays crowded with perfectly identical bites, decorated with sliced olives, piped cheese, curled vegetables, and tiny flags that no tired woman had previously realized dinner required. The message was encouraging entertaining could be easy. The accompanying image quietly explained that easy now included 6 appetizers. Some women enjoyed the novelty and creativity. Others relied on familiar family recipes, regional specialties, or whatever the budget allowed. In many homes, a bowl of nuts and a plate of crackers were entirely sufficient. The pressure came not from one universal rule, but from the increasing number of possible standards a hostess could use to judge herself. The cocktail interval also revealed differences among households. In homes that did not serve alcohol, the pre-dinner period might center on coffee, fruit, punch, tomato juice, soft drinks, or immediate movement to the table. Religious customs could discourage drinking altogether. Family gatherings might begin with food rather than waiting. Working-class hosts, rural families, and large extended households often had little reason to imitate the formal pacing shown in metropolitan etiquette guides. Children might be present, relatives might enter through the kitchen, and appetizers might consist of whatever was already being prepared. Yet even in informal settings, some version of the waiting period remained. Guests arrived at different times. Food needed finishing. Someone had to keep everyone comfortable. Hospitality was always partly an art of managing time. Formal entertaining simply gave that time a tray, a napkin, and several olives arranged in a circle. At 8:10, the roasters rested long enough, the rolls are warm, and the sauces agreed to remain smooth. The canapes have nearly disappeared, though the man beside the nut bowl appears ready to continue indefinitely. You enter the living room one final time and exchange a glance with your husband. This is the signal practiced only through experience. He places his glass on the sideboard and gradually draws the scattered conversations toward a close. You do not shout that dinner is ready from the kitchen. You allow the announcement to gather dignity. The host invites everyone into the dining room. Guests set down napkins, rescue cigarettes from ashtrays, and begin moving toward the table with the pleasant seriousness of people who've been promised food. The delay has been successfully disguised as a cocktail hour. No one knows the roast required extra time. No one has seen the sauce repaired. The tiny foods have completed their assignment. Now each guest must locate a chair, and the seating plan will reveal that the evening's most complicated arrangement was never on the canapé tray at all. A seating plan was a map of the relationships the hostess hoped would survive until dessert. The guests enter the dining room expecting only to find chairs, but every place has already been assigned according to rank temperament, marriage age, occupation, conversational ability, and the dangerous question of who has recently offended whom. Place cards may wait above the plates, small rectangles of paper carrying names in careful handwriting. Their presence removes the confusion of people circling the table, while asking where they should sit, though it also confirms that sitting has become too important to leave to chance. The male host and female host may occupy opposite ends of a rectangular table, allowing each to guide one half of the conversation and supervise the movement of dishes. The most honoured male guest may be seated near the hostess, while an important female guest may be placed near the host. Beyond that, the arrangement becomes less a rule than a series of negotiations. The husband's supervisor should receive attention without being positioned so prominently that the purpose of the evening becomes obvious. The quiet guest needs encouragement. The talkative guest needs distance from anyone easily trapped. The woman who dislikes cigarette smoke should not be placed beside the man already reaching for his case. 8 chairs stand around one table. None of them is politically neutral. Married couples are often separated, especially at a formal dinner, because the evening is expected to create new conversation rather than reproduce the private one already available at home. This principle sounds sociable until a wife discovers that she has been placed beside a stranger who discusses municipal drainage for 40 minutes, while her husband laughs comfortably at the other end of the table. Separating spouses can prevent a shy couple from speaking only to one another. It can also prevent a quarrelsome couple from continuing an argument over the potatoes. Yet the rule must be used with judgment. Newly married guests may prefer to remain close, particularly if they know few people. An older husband may rely on his wife because of poor hearing illness or discomfort in unfamiliar company. A guest who is anxious visiting from another region or uncertain about the customs of the household may feel abandoned when directed to a chair across the room. Etiquette offers structure, but graciousness requires noticing the person inside it. The hostess has therefore separated 3 couples, kept one pair within easy sight of each other, and placed herself beside Mr. Harrison, whose presence began the entire evening. Her own husband sits near Mrs. Harrison. The arrangement appears balanced. It has also transformed 4 marriages into temporary diplomatic missions. Alternating men and women around the table may be preferred in many formal settings, though actual households adapt the pattern to their guests. The idea assumes an even number of men and women and a social world organized neatly into married heterosexual couples. Real life is less cooperative. A widowed aunt, an unmarried colleague, a divorced neighbor, or a guest whose spouse cannot attend immediately disrupts the symmetry. The hostess must then arrange people without making anyone feel like the extra piece left after a puzzle is complete. Single women in particular may be invited to balance numbers, assist conversation, or partner an unattached man as though their presence required a seating function beyond being welcome. An unmarried woman might recognize that she's been included because a 9th guest would have disturbed the table, and a 7th man required someone beside him. She may still enjoy the evening. She may also notice. A bachelor can be treated similarly invited, partly because he speaks well, dances acceptably, or fills a chair without bringing another opinion to accommodate. Formal hospitality likes even numbers because furniture likes even numbers. Human dignity is expected to cooperate. Age and social standing also shape placement, though the rules vary according to formality and community. An older guest may be given a comfortable chair away from a draught. A clergyman visiting relative, employer, prominent local figure or guest of honor may receive a place near one of the hosts. A newcomer may be placed where several people can draw her into conversation. Someone familiar with the household can tolerate a less protected position, perhaps near the kitchen door or at a corner where serving dishes repeatedly pass. The hosts themselves often accept whatever inconvenience remains. Your chair is closest to the route into the kitchen because you will need to leave it. Your husband's chair offers a broader view of the room because he is expected to support conversation. The difference looks like symmetry from above. From where you sit, it means rising 6 times while he remains comfortably involved in a story. The best chair goes to the guest whose comfort signals respect. The least convenient chair goes to the person who arranged the chairs. This is considered hospitality rather than a structural flaw. Temperament may matter more than rank. The seating plan must distribute conversation across the table rather than concentrate it in one loud cluster. 2 energetic storytellers placed together may compete until everyone else becomes an audience. 2 shy guests may spend the soup studying the silver. A political enthusiast should not sit beside someone who considers disagreement a recreational activity, particularly when cocktails have already reduced the nation's remaining reserves of restraint. The host colleague who knows only office subjects may need a neighbour with enough curiosity to ask questions without turning dinner into an extension of the workday. Mrs. Harrison, who enjoys gardening, has been placed near the woman from across the street, whose roses are locally respected. The man from accounting sits beside a guest who follows baseball, giving both of them somewhere safe to begin. The couple who quarrel are several chairs apart, each beside someone unlikely to mention money, driving, or the route taken to the party. A good seating plan does not guarantee harmony. It merely places small barriers between foreseeable disasters. Once guests reach the table, they must obey the arrangement without visibly resisting it. A man may help the woman beside him with her chair, drawing it back as she sits. Guests should not exchange place cards because they prefer another companion, though a hostess may quietly change the plan if a practical need becomes clear. A hearing difficulty, injured leg, strong draft, or unexpected conflict matters more than the original map. What should not happen is the cheerful announcement that two guests have decided to sit together instead, leaving everyone else to rearrange themselves around the decision. One moved chair alters the entire table. The honoured guest may end up beside the kitchen door. A married pair may reunite while a stranger is stranded at the far end. The hostess smiles and repairs the arrangement if she can, but every spontaneous improvement creates work somewhere else. The same principle applies to arriving late. A late guest enters a room where the social geometry has already hardened. Everyone must pause. Chairs move, napkins shift, introductions resume. The person apologizes. The food waits. Time returns briefly to the condition it had before the canapes were deployed. Conversation is supposed to flow across the arrangement, but the shape of the table controls what is possible. At a small round table, everyone can speak together. At a long rectangular table, several conversations form naturally with the hosts, attempting to prevent either end from becoming isolated. A centerpiece that is too high creates visual borders. Candles serving bowls and wine bottles add smaller obstacles. A soft-spoken guest may be heard only by the two people nearest her. A loud guest can reach all eight without assistance. The hostess listens while participating in the conversation beside her, noting whether the far end has gone silent. She may direct a question towards someone overlooked, connect two subjects, or ask her husband to draw another guest in. She must do this without making the quiet person feel publicly rescued. Mrs. Allen didn't. "You visit California last year is more graceful than you haven't said anything." The table should feel like a shared evening, not a classroom in which participation is being recorded. Yet someone is always recording it. She's also checking the water glasses. Seating customs expose the limits of the polished suburban ideal. Not every family held formal dinners with place cards matched couples and ranked guests. At crowded family tables, people sat where space allowed. Children might occupy a smaller table in the kitchen. Folding chairs could be added beside the sideboard. In large rural immigrant church or extended family gatherings, age kinship, custom, and practical access to the food might matter more than alternating men and women. Black families living under segregation developed rich traditions of hospitality and community gathering that mainstream white etiquette books seldom represented fairly or fully. Religious customs could shape who sat together, how food was blessed, and whether the meal followed formal secular patterns at all. Working-class households might consider an elaborate seating plan unnecessary or absurd, especially after shifts travel childcare, and shared cooking had already determined who arrived when. The rules described one influential standard, not a national law. Still, standards can exert pressure even on people who do not follow them. A magazine image of a balanced table can make an ordinary crowded supper appear deficient when it is actually full of life. Everyone is finally seated. Napkins unfold. The candles burn steadily. The centerpiece remains low enough to permit recognition across the table, which now feels like a remarkable achievement. Mr. Harrison sits at your right, his wife near your husband. The separated couples begin new conversations willingly or otherwise. The quiet woman has found the gardening subject. The accounting man is already explaining the previous baseball season. No one has openly objected to a chair. For the moment, the seating plan appears successful. Then the first course must be served and the calm arrangement begins to move. Plates will arrive and disappear. Dishes will pass from hand to hand. Glasses will be refilled. Guests will reach left when they should reach right, and someone will almost certainly keep a serving spoon that must continue around the table. The people are in position. Now the food must travel among them according to rules nearly as complicated as the ones that put them there. Dinner service was a traffic system conducted with platters, elbows, and the firm belief that everyone understood the rules. Once the guests were seated, food could no longer simply arrive. It had to enter from the correct direction, reach the correct person, move around the table without reversing course, and disappear again without interrupting a story. Formal service guides often distinguished between dishes offered from a platter and plates already arranged in the kitchen, with different conventions for approaching the guest. In many households, the simplified lesson became offer food from the left place, or remove certain items from the right, and avoid reaching across anyone unless the house was actively sinking. The exact procedure varied with the type of service, the formality of the dinner, and whether anyone besides the hostess was available to carry it out. This did not prevent people from treating one remembered rule as though it had been engraved on the Constitution. You stand behind the first chair with a serving dish balanced in both hands, trying to remember which side belongs to the peas. The guest turns unexpectedly. A sleeve approaches the gravy. Someone moves a water glass into your path. The table, so calm 5 minutes earlier, has become a crowded intersection with candles. If food is offered from a large platter, the guest may serve himself using the provided spoon and fork while the server holds the dish at a comfortable height. Comfortable for the guest, that is. The person holding a heavy platter of sliced roast and vegetables must remain steady, while each diner examines the arrangement, chooses a piece, changes his mind and attempts to separate it from its neighbours without disturbing the parsley. The platter should be offered low enough to reach, but not so low that it touches the table or the guest's shoulder. The serving utensils must face the correct direction and remain on the platter after use. One guest takes a slice quickly. Another approaches the roast as though selecting a building site. A third uses the spoon but forgets the fork, causing several pieces to move together in temporary solidarity. You smile. Your wrists begin to reconsider the evening. If a guest refuses a dish, the refusal should be accepted without discussion. Asking why turns a quiet preference into public testimony. Perhaps he dislikes peas. Perhaps she cannot eat the sauce. Perhaps the food reminds someone of boarding school. None of this needs to be examined while 8 people are watching. Plated service solves some problems and creates others. In the kitchen, each dinner plate can be arranged with meat, vegetables, and garnish before being carried to the table. This gives the hostess control over presentation and portions. It also requires her to assemble 8 plates quickly enough that the first does not cool while the last is still receiving potatoes. Plates cover the counter. Steam fogs the nearest window. The roast must be divided evenly, though 2 slices are thinner than intended, and one guest has been seated beside a man whose appetite was obvious during the canapé hour. You arrange the portions with the practical fairness of someone distributing limited territory. The host can receive the smaller servings without comment. An honoured guest should not be given the plate containing the broken potato or the carrot that has surrendered its shape. Once arranged, the plates must travel. 2 can be carried safely. 3 may be possible for someone trained or unusually confident. You carry 2 return for 2 more and repeat the journey while conversation continues beyond the door. By the final trip, the first guests are politely waiting. Nobody begins until the hostess is seated or indicates that they should, which means the food and manners now cool together. Passing dishes around the table appears simpler because the guests perform much of the labor. The serving bowl begins with the hostess or host and moves in an agreed direction, often to the right, although the important requirement is consistency. Each person serves a modest portion and passes the dish onward with the handle of the spoon ready for the next guest. Problems begin when someone sets the bowl down after serving himself, believing its journey complete. The guest beside him waits. Someone across the table points discreetly. The bowl resumes moving, now several chairs behind schedule. A serving spoon may travel separately from the dish. Salt may be passed without pepper, violating the custom of keeping the pair together. A guest may stretch across the centerpiece rather than asking for an item, bringing his cuff near the candle and his tie into negotiations with the gravy. The hostess watches every object. She cannot openly direct the table like a railway clerk, but she can say, "Would you pass that to Mrs. Allen?" in a voice suggesting the dish was always expected to stop there. Domestic air traffic depends on calm announcements. Bread presents its own circulation problem. Rolls may be passed in a lined basket, with each guest taking one before sending the basket onward. Butter may appear on individual plates or in a shared dish. A guest should generally break off a small piece of bread and butter it as needed, rather than covering the entire roll in advance, as though preparing it for storage. This distinction matters greatly to etiquette writers and very little to a hungry person. Still at a formal table, small actions become evidence of familiarity with the rules. Soup is spooned away from the diner in some traditional instruction, then sipped quietly from the side of the spoon. A knife rests with its blade turned inward. Used utensils remain on the plate rather than returning to the tablecloth. Napkins stay on laps. Elbows are managed carefully, especially where chairs have been added and personal territory is limited. The guests perform these motions while carrying on conversation, making eye contact and pretending not to notice who has chosen the wrong fork. Good manners are partly the art of knowing the rule. Better manners are the art of not humiliating someone who does not. Clearing the table requires another coordinated movement. Plates should not vanish while one person is still eating, because the remaining diner may feel hurried or publicly identified as the slowest member of the group. The hostess watches the position of the knives and forks, empty plates, and the small pauses that indicate completion. When everyone has finished a course, removal can begin. In formal service, plates may be cleared from a particular side according to the method being used. But in a crowded home, the safest side is often the one not blocked by a wall, another chair, or Mr. Allen's expressive right arm. You lift one plate, then another, stacking only if the dishes and circumstances permit. Scraping food at the table is avoided. The remains should not be consolidated in front of the guests, turning the meal they have just praised into a visible collection of bones and wilted lettuce. Plates disappear individually or in manageable groups and are carried behind the swinging door. Their elegance ends immediately. Forks clatter into a basin. Scraps are removed. Serving dishes crowd the counter. The kitchen receives the physical truth of the dining room's refined experience. Crumbing the table between courses belongs to more formal service, and may involve removing scattered crumbs with a small tool-folded napkin or clean plate. In a modest household, the hostess may simply ignore any crumb not large enough to have voting rights. Yet the cloth must remain presentable for dessert. Salt bread fragments, spilled water, and a small mark of gravy have appeared despite every precaution. One guest has dropped a pea near the candlestick. Another has folded his napkin over a suspicious spot either to hide it or prevent further diplomatic concern. You remove unnecessary serving dishes, replace utensils if dessert requires them, and make room for coffee cups. The table changes character. The heavy work of the main course retreats. Dessert plates, smaller forks, cups, saucers, cream and sugar prepare to enter. This transition should feel natural, as though the dining room has quietly rearranged itself. In reality, you have carried several loads to the kitchen, opened 2 drawers, discovered that 1 spoon is missing, and returned before the conversation reaches a place where your absence becomes obvious. A trained domestic worker could perform these movements with practiced precision, but many hostesses learned by reading etiquette guides, observing restaurants, watching older relatives, or surviving earlier dinners. The instructions often reflected formal households with enough space and assistance to approach every guest correctly. A small dining room offered less room for theory. The hostess might be trapped between a chair and the sideboard. One guest might sit with his back near the wall. The kitchen door might open directly behind another. Correct service then became a compromise between convention and the prevention of injury. Informal households passed bowls, asked guests to help themselves, or placed the entire meal on a buffet. These methods did not indicate a lack of generosity. They often reflected the practical recognition that companionship mattered more than the direction from which beans arrived. Mary and Russell Wright's post-war arguments for easier, less rigid living belong to a broader movement towards simplified, entertaining modern tableware and meals that did not require the suburban home to imitate a hotel dining room. But change moved unevenly. When guests were older, important or unfamiliar, the old rules could return very quickly. The service also revealed whose comfort carried the greatest importance. Guests remained seated while food reached them. The host might pour wine or pass dishes, but the hostess repeatedly rose, walked lifted and returned. Her plate cooled during kitchen trips. Her conversation stopped and restarted. She might eat only a few bites before noticing an empty water glass or remembering the rolls. A guest who thanked her for the meal usually meant it sincerely, but thanks could not fully name the physical pattern of the evening. She had spent dinner orbiting the table rather than inhabiting it. The rules were described as graceful because they protected guests from inconvenience. The inconvenience did not disappear. It gathered in one person's feet, wrist schedule, and unfinished plate. At last the main course dishes are gone. The guests lean back slightly, napkins still across their laps, and conversation relaxes now that no platter is moving near anyone's shoulder. The table bears the soft disorder of a meal, successfully eaten, water glasses half full, candles, shorter crumbs visible, and one serving spoon resting in a location no one remembers choosing. You stand in the kitchen beside a counter crowded with china and listen to laughter from the dining room. Dessert waits in the refrigerator. Coffee has begun to percolate. For a brief moment, nothing needs to enter from the left or disappear from the right. Then a guest mentions politics. Another answers too quickly, and the conversation begins moving with considerably less discipline than the serving dishes. Conversation was the only course that could not be prepared in the kitchen, although the hostess was still expected to keep it from burning. The main plates have been cleared, the candles have shortened, and the guests sit more comfortably now that the roast no longer requires their attention. For several minutes the table enjoys that pleasant stage of dinner when everyone is warm-fed and willing to believe the evening's gone well. Then Mr. Allen mentions the president. The remark is mild, almost decorative, but another guest answers with a firmness that changes the air by half a degree. Your hand pauses on the kitchen door. Political disagreement is not forbidden in every household, and thoughtful adults certainly discuss public affairs, But a dinner party built around business connections and neighborhood harmony is not the ideal place to discover how strongly two guests disagree about taxes, unions, foreign policy, civil rights, or the direction of the country. Conversation must remain lively enough to prevent boredom, but controlled enough to prevent honesty from becoming operational. The hostess is expected to encourage personality while quietly limiting its range. Guests may reveal interests, travels, amusing experiences, and opinions about gardening. They should not necessarily reveal what they think of one another. Safe conversation depends upon subjects with enough substance to sustain interest and too little danger to divide the table. Travel is useful provided no one turns it into a contest of expense. Movies are useful provided the star under discussion has not become a moral controversy. Books can work if everyone has read something and nobody uses the opportunity to examine another guest's intelligence. Gardens, home improvements, automobiles, schools, local events, vacations, sports, cooking, and the minor inconveniences of weather all offer reliable territory. A guest may describe a train trip, a new washing machine, a child's school play, or the difficulty of growing roses in poor soil. These subjects allow others to contribute without surrendering private convictions. The hostess listens for openings. Mrs. Harrison mentions California, so you ask whether she travelled by train. Mr. Allen speaks of his new automobile, so your husband invites the accounting man to compare engines. Someone praises the flowers, and the woman across the street explained what survives in her garden. Each question creates a bridge. The bridges do not need to lead anywhere important. They need only keep people moving until coffee. Certain subjects carry warning labels. Money may be discussed indirectly through prices, houses, jobs, and purchases, yet direct questions about salary or debt remain risky. Religion may be central to the lives of several guests, but a comparison of doctrine can turn the salad course into a council meeting. Illness invites sympathy, though detailed symptoms may weaken enthusiasm for dessert. Marital difficulties are private. Child rearing is safe until someone implies that another person's child is badly managed. Business is useful for men who share an occupation, but too much of it leaves their wives listening to a second workday. Gossip is especially powerful because it creates immediate intimacy. Two people who struggle to discuss books may become brilliantly articulate when a neighbor's name is introduced. Yet gossip can damage trust, reveal cruelty, and travel home faster than any guest. A careful hostess may allow a harmless story then redirect before speculation hardens into judgment. I heard the bakers are moving can become a discussion of neighborhoods. I heard why the bakers are moving may require the sudden appearance of dessert. The hostess manages these shifts without appearing to manage them. She cannot strike the table and announce that politics has been suspended until further notice. She asks a question. She remembers an amusing story. She invites a quiet guest to speak. She notices that the men at one end have moved from government spending to labor disputes and asks whether anyone has seen the new department store downtown. The transition may be abrupt, but abruptness is preferable to a disagreement that follows everyone into the living room. Her husband should help. As host, he can change subjects, draw in another speaker, or use humor to reduce tension. Whether he notices the need is another matter. He may be enjoying the argument. Some men consider heated discussion a sign that the evening has become interesting, especially when they are not responsible for seeing the guests again at church across the hedge or in the grocery aisle. The wife understands that tomorrow belongs to the neighborhood. Tonight's clever remark may still be standing beside the mailbox on Monday. Silence creates the opposite problem. A pause of several seconds may be natural, especially while guests are eating, but the hostess experiences it as an alarm. She hears forks touch china. She hears the clock in the next room. She hears the small electrical hum of the house. Everyone may simply be comfortable, yet the quiet feels as though the party has failed, and the guests are privately reviewing the furniture. She reaches for a subject, a recent film, a trip, a school event, anything. The pressure to prevent silence can produce conversations stranger than silence itself. People begin discussing traffic patterns, the difficulty of finding reliable shoe repair, or whether the new supermarket arranges canned goods sensibly. Still, these topics perform a valuable service. They give the room a rhythm. They allow shy guests time to join. They prevent the loudest person from owning every minute. A gracious dinner does not require brilliant conversation. It requires enough shared attention that no one feels stranded. This is a modest goal, though it can demand the concentration of an orchestra conductor, managing instruments that have brought their own drinks. Women often carried a particular conversational burden. They were expected to listen attentively, ask encouraging questions, laugh without dominating, and soften subjects that became too sharp. A wife might help her husband appear interesting by inviting him to tell a familiar story, then react warmly as though she had not heard it during 3 previous dinners and twice in the car. She might rescue another woman whose husband interrupted her, or redirect a joke that had become unkind. She had to be informed enough to participate, but not so forceful that she were accused of turning the evening into debate. This standard varied greatly across families and communities, and many women spoke boldly, argued intelligently, and ignored such expectations. Still, popular etiquette often praised the woman who made others feel fascinating. Her success was measured by what guests revealed, not by what she contributed. She became a mirror with lipstick. The skill was real. So was the cost of using it all evening. The topics avoided at the table were often the ones shaping life outside it. Racial segregation, Cold War fear, economic insecurity, religious prejudice, women's employment, divorce, alcoholism, political suspicion, and the unequal treatment of entire communities did not vanish because the hostess served coffee. Black families and guests navigated social conversations under pressures white etiquette books rarely acknowledged. A black professional might have to decide how openly to discuss discrimination in a mixed workplace. Jewish families might encounter casual remarks about religion or belonging. Immigrants could hear accents treated as curiosities. A working wife might be asked whether her husband minded her job. An unmarried woman might be questioned about when she planned to settle down, as though privacy were merely an invitation that had not yet been answered. Polite conversation could protect people from open conflict, but it could also protect prejudice from being challenged. The rule against uncomfortable subjects was not always neutral. Sometimes it kept the evening peaceful. Sometimes it required the person being diminished to preserve everyone else's comfort. Even humour required supervision. A well-timed joke could restore warmth after disagreement, but jokes about marriage, women, drivers, ethnic groups, servants, bachelors, or unhappy wives often depended on familiar humiliations. A guest might laugh because everyone else laughed. The hostess might smile because correcting him would create a larger disturbance than the remark itself. This was one reason dinner table harmony could feel so complicated. The surface remained pleasant because someone absorbed the unpleasantness without returning it. Not every silence was approval. Not every laugh was amusement. People protected jobs, marriages, friendships, reputations, and future invitations by allowing certain sentences to pass. The dinner party taught a form of social survival: know when to speak, know when to redirect, and know when the safest response is to ask whether anyone would like more coffee. Dessert finally arrives as both food and intervention. You enter carrying 8 small dishes, and the political discussion breaks apart under the practical need to make room. Spoons are lifted, compliments begin, The dessert gives everyone a new subject with no constitutional consequences. Mrs. Harrison asks for the recipe. Mr. Allen praises the texture. Your husband remarks that you make it especially well, which is generous and slightly surprising because he watched you make it from a printed recipe that afternoon. Conversation settles into safer channels. Coffee is poured, sugar passes around the table, the candles reflect in the cups and the room recovers its warmth. The dangerous moment has passed. No one has left offended, at least not visibly. No friendship has been destroyed, though several opinions have been recorded for future reference. You sit for a minute with your own dessert and allow yourself to listen rather than steer. The voices overlap softly now. Then one glass is refilled, a laugh grows louder than before, and the guest who has been drinking most enthusiastically begins telling a story that should probably have ended 2 drinks ago. The guest who drank too much rarely announced the moment when pleasant sociability became a household problem. The change arrived gradually disguised as confidence. One highball loosened conversation. A second made the same story seem worth telling again. A third encouraged Mr. Allen to believe that everyone at the table had been waiting all evening to hear his private opinion of the company president. By dessert, his voice is louder, his gestures broader, and his cigarette spends an increasing amount of time near the tablecloth. The other guests continue smiling because naming the problem would embarrass him, his wife, the hosts, and perhaps the entire social circle. The hostess therefore receives another invisible assignment. She must slow the drinking, protect the furniture rescue, the conversation reassure the wife, preserve the man's dignity, and somehow determine whether he can safely travel home. She must do all of this without appearing to have noticed anything unusual. Dinner party etiquette is generous in theory. In practice, it often asks one woman to solve a crisis using coffee sandwiches and facial expressions. Alcohol has been present since the cocktail hour first as a symbol of welcome and sophistication. Ice clicked in the glasses. Bottles stood neatly on the sideboard. The host mixed drinks and remembered who preferred soda, ginger ale, or nothing at all. By dinner, wine or another drink may have appeared with the food, followed perhaps by a refill after dessert. The individual serving does not always look large, especially when surrounded by ice glass and polite conversation. Yet drinks accumulate while the evening moves slowly. A guest who has eaten little may feel them sooner. Someone tired, anxious, unused to alcohol, or determined to impress others may continue accepting refills after judgment has begun to soften. The host contributes partly through generosity. An empty glass appears to request attention, and attentive hosting means filling needs before they are stated. Unfortunately, the glass may be empty because the guest has finished it quickly. Refilling it automatically rewards speed. The bottle rises. The hostess catches her husband's eye. He pauses, then adds more soda than whiskey. This is not mentioned. The highball returns looking respectable and behaving with reduced ambition. The first duty is to prevent the problem from becoming entertainment. A guest who speaks too freely may reveal office gossip, criticize an absent neighbor, describe a private disagreement, or tell a joke that grows less charming with every sentence. The room can react in several ways. Some people laugh from discomfort. Others become intensely interested in their coffee. The man's wife may attempt a soft interruption only to be waved aside. If the host joins the laughter, the guest is encouraged. If someone corrects him sharply, embarrassment turns public. The hostess searches for an exit that resembles ordinary conversation. She asks another guest a question. She announces that coffee is ready. She brings in a plate of small sandwiches or leftover canapés, giving the room something physical to do. Food may slow the pace and redirect attention, though it cannot erase what has already been said. Mr. Allen begins another story about the office. You interrupt with apparent innocence to ask Mrs. Harrison whether she still wants the dessert recipe. The women turn toward one another. Your husband offers Alan coffee. The evening bends away from the dangerous subject by several degrees. Sometimes that is enough. Cigarettes make the management more visible. An alert smoker taps ash into the tray and rests the cigarette carefully along its edge. A less steady guest misses. Ash falls onto the cloth or carpet. A glowing cigarette is forgotten between two fingers, while the hand moves through the air to emphasize a point. The hostess watches the ember pass near a sleeve of flour and the polished arm of a chair. She moves an ashtray closer without comment. If a cigarette burns too long, she may replace the tray, giving the guest a reason to set it down. The room is already hazy from several smokers, and the air carries tobacco perfume, coffee candle wax, and the remains of dinner. Curtains and upholstery will preserve the evening long after the guests leave. A dropped ash can be cleaned. A burned tablecloth is harder to explain. Still, the greater risk is humiliation. Grabbing the cigarette from a guest would create a scene. Allowing it to wander may create a fire. Hospitality now requires the calm interception of a small burning object held by a man explaining sales figures. The guest's wife often bears the most immediate social burden. She notices the change before anyone else and may have noticed it many times before. Her smile tightens. She touches his sleeve. She suggests that they should leave soon. He insists that the evening is young. If she corrects him publicly, she may be accused of scolding. If she remains silent, others may wonder why she does not control him. His behavior becomes evidence against her judgment, marriage, or domestic skill, while his own responsibility is softened into a joke about having enjoyed himself. The double standard is familiar. A man who drinks too much may be treated as boisterous, amusing, or temporarily foolish. A woman who does the same risks harsher judgment about her character, respectability, or fitness as a wife and mother. This does not mean drunken men escaped all consequences, especially in work, family, or community life. It means the social language often offered them more room to recover. Their wives were expected to arrange the recovery. You find a quiet moment beside Mrs. Allen near the dining room door. She says they should probably go. You agree without making her explain. The next problem is transportation. They arrive by automobile and Mr. Allen believes he can drive. Admitting otherwise would require him to accept that the room has observed his condition. Your husband can offer to drive them home, call a taxi where one is available, or suggest that they leave the car until morning. Another guest may volunteer. The offer must be framed as convenience rather than judgment. Perhaps the roads are dark. Perhaps your husband was going that way. Perhaps there is no reason for both of them to return for the car tomorrow, when arrangements can be made. Everyone understands the real reason, but the polite fiction gives Mr. Allen a path that preserves some dignity. He refuses at first. Your husband repeats the offer more firmly, still smiling. Mrs. Allen says she would feel better. That settles it more effectively than argument. The keys are transferred with minimal ceremony. Not every household handled drinking in the same way. Many families did not serve alcohol at all because of religion, recovery, personal preference, cost, or painful experience. In some homes, cocktails were treated as modern sophistication. In others, the bottle carried memories of wages spent, tempers released, or promises broken. Mainstream advertising often presented alcohol inside polished rooms, filled with attractive adults who remained cheerful, articulate, and perfectly balanced. The advertisements did not show the wife counting drinks, the child listening from upstairs, or the host deciding whether a guest should be trusted with car keys. Social drinking could be pleasant and moderate. It could also expose problems the culture preferred to convert into humour. A man who repeatedly lost control might be described as someone who couldn't hold his liquor, a phrase that made the issue sound almost mechanical. The deeper effects on marriage's money work and safety were harder to discuss at a dinner table designed to avoid uncomfortable truths. The departure is managed quietly. Mrs. Allen retrieves her handbag while you go upstairs for the coats. Her husband remains in the living room telling the accounting man that he has never felt better. This statement convinces no one. You bring down the wool overcoat and help Mrs. Allen into hers. Your husband says he will drive them home and return shortly. Another guest offers to follow in their car so it will not need to remain overnight. The plan forms around Mr. Allen without openly identifying him as the reason for it. He protests once, then accepts. At the doorway, he thanks you too warmly, holding your hand longer than necessary and praising the dinner in several overlapping sentences. You tell him you are glad he came. Mrs. Allen meets your eyes for 1 second, carrying embarrassment, gratitude, and exhaustion, in a look too private for the room. Then the door closes behind them. The remaining guests stand in a brief silence. Someone remarks that the evening has become late. Another begins gathering gloves. Good manners prevent a formal discussion of what just happened, though the subject may travel home in every car. Coats are found, farewells exchanged, and invitations vaguely promised in return. Soon the house is quiet except for the clock and the distant sound of your husband's automobile returning. Ashtrays are full. Glasses stand on tables with melted ice at the bottom. One small burn has appeared on a cocktail napkin, but the tablecloth has survived. The party has survived too, which is how success is often measured after midnight. No one shouted. No one drove home unsafely. No friendship ended in the living room. The hostess has protected everyone's dignity, including the dignity of the person who endangered it. Tomorrow, however, the roast will not be the part of the evening people remember most. Before tomorrow arrives, there remains the possibility of an even more immediate disaster, a late course, a failed sauce, or a dish that refuses to reach the table in the condition promised by the menu. Long before Mr. Allen reached his third highball, the evening's first genuine disaster had already begun in the kitchen. The roast was late. Not dramatically late not yet, but late enough that the kitchen clock had become an enemy, and the pleasant interval before dinner was beginning to stretch beyond its natural life. The guests were in the living room with drinks, canapes, cigarettes, and no visible reason to worry. You were standing before the oven in your dinner dress, protected by an apron, staring through the small glass window at a piece of meat that had apparently rejected the household schedule. The outside looked properly browned. The thermometer, however, suggested that the centre remained committed to an earlier and less cooked stage of existence. Dinner had been planned for 8. It was now 7:55. The vegetables were nearly ready, the rolls were warming, the sauce had reached its intended consistency, and the roast required perhaps 20 more minutes, perhaps 30. Meat does not negotiate. It does not care that the husband's supervisor is discussing automobiles in the next room. It has never read an etiquette book. A hostess could control the invitations, the napkins, the seating plan, and the height of the flowers. The roast retained its independence. The first rule of domestic disaster was that the guests should not know a disaster existed. You closed the oven door gently because slamming it would not improve the temperature and might alert the living room. Then you began buying time. Another tray of canapes went out. The nut bowl was replenished. Your husband was quietly instructed to slow the movement toward the dining room, and if possible lengthen the conversation without lengthening the drinks. This required precision. A delay of 10 minutes could feel relaxed. A delay of 30 could produce hunger suspicion, and the dangerous belief that another highball was necessary. You returned to the living room carrying cheese crackers and an expression of complete confidence. Someone complimented the flowers. Someone asked when you had found time to do everything. You laughed softly and said it had been easy enough while the oven behind the wall continued conducting its private rebellion. The hostess's skill was not measured only by preventing mistakes. It was measured by absorbing them without allowing the room to change temperature. Her face became a curtain. Behind it, the potatoes were waiting. Every course had its own tolerance for delay. A roast could remain in the oven, but vegetables could become soft, rolls could dry. Gravy could thicken, salad could wilt, and cold appetizers could disappear entirely into hungry guests. The whole menu had been designed to arrive together, which meant one delayed item pulled every other item into danger. You lowered the heat beneath the beans, covered the potatoes, moved the rolls away from the hottest part of the oven, and added a small amount of liquid to the sauce. The kitchen filled with steam, warm metal, and the smell of food that had been ready too soon. A spoon clattered against a pan. You froze and listened. Conversation continued in the living room. Good. You checked the roast again. The thermometer had moved, but not enough to deserve gratitude. A modern cook might search for emergency advice, order something else, or send a message explaining the delay. You had a cookbook, a clock, and your own judgment. The household telephone could contact another human being, but calling someone to ask what to do with 8 guests already in the house would require a level of public surrender not currently available. The problem might be solved by carving the roast sooner, but this carried risk. A beautifully browned exterior could conceal an undercooked center, and discovering that fact on the serving platter would transfer the crisis from kitchen to table. Returning slices to the oven after the guests had seen them would be difficult to present as part of the plan. Overcooking brought the opposite danger. A hostess afraid of serving meat too rare might leave it too long, producing a main course that required determination from both knife and guest. The ideal point depended on the cut, the recipe, the equipment, and the preferences of the household. Ovens did not always heat evenly or report temperature accurately. Opening the door repeatedly released heat, although the urge to look was almost irresistible. You tried not to check again for several minutes. Instead, you arranged the serving platter, warmed it, placed the carving knife beside it, and inspected the garnish as though parsley might offer leadership. The roast remained inside. The platter waited outside. Between them stood the woman who would receive full responsibility for whichever one failed. When a dish went wrong, ingenuity became more important than honesty. A sauce that separated might be beaten, strained, renamed, or served in reduced quantity. Burned rolls could lose their darkest edges and reappear beneath a folded napkin. A fallen cake might be covered with cream fruit or the useful phrase home style. Vegetables cooked too long could be mashed, creamed, or presented as though softness had always been intended. A broken gelatin mold could be spooned into individual dishes where collapse became portion control. A roast that arrived late could be preceded by another small course, a larger salad, or an unusually leisurely round of conversation. The rule was not to deceive maliciously. It was to protect the guests from the discomfort of watching the hostess suffer. Yet this protection had an interesting direction. The guests were spared embarrassment. The hostess experienced all of it privately, at increased speed while wearing stockings and a dress that could not be washed casually. Domestic competence often meant converting mistakes into features before anyone else learned their original names. The emotional danger was larger than the food itself. A failed dish could feel like evidence that the hostess had failed, especially when the dinner involved people whose opinion mattered to her husband's work, the family's standing, or her own confidence. The magazines and cookbooks offered solutions, photographs, schedules, and encouraging language, but the finished images rarely showed panic. They suggested that preparation produced certainty. Real kitchens produced weather. Humidity affected baking. Ovens behaved differently. Ingredients varied. Children distracted. Telephones rang. Guests arrived early. A husband opened the oven to look, and release the heat you'd been carefully preserving. None of these events meant the woman lacked intelligence or skill, yet domestic culture often treated the meal as a personal report card. If the roast was dry, she was careless. If dinner was late, she was disorganized. If the menu was plain, she lacked imagination. The food crossed the table, carrying judgments that had little to do with hunger. A man could make an error at work and call it a difficult day. A woman could make an error at dinner and watch it served to 8 witnesses. Eventually the thermometer reached a safer point. The roast came out and rested while the living room conversation was steered toward its final circuit. Resting the meat required more patience, though patience now felt almost insulting. Carving immediately would release the juices, but waiting meant another 5 or 10 minutes while the vegetables continued aging. You removed the apron, checked your lipstick, and entered the living room to announce that dinner was ready. Nobody looked angry. Nobody had counted the minutes aloud. The canapes had done their work. Guests rose, extinguished cigarettes, and followed you toward the dining room. Back in the kitchen, your husband carved while you arranged the slices. The center was slightly rarer than you had planned, but acceptable. The outer pieces were more cooked and could be offered to guests who preferred them that way. The smaller, less attractive slices went to the hosts. Gravy covered minor irregularities with the discretion of an experienced friend. The platter entered beneath the candlelight looking deliberate, abundant, and punctual enough. Compliments came almost immediately. The roast was tender, the gravy was excellent. One guest asked how long it had cooked, a question you answered with a general phrase rather than the full emotional chronology. Your husband looked pleased. The supervisor accepted another slice. The delay that had seemed enormous in the kitchen left almost no mark on the dining room. This was the strange mercy of many domestic crises. The hostess experienced them in detail while everyone else encountered only the repaired result. Her panic had no public record. The guests remembered the flavour, not the thermometer. They did not know the beans had waited beneath the lid, or that the rolls had nearly crossed into another category of material. The meal succeeded because she had adapted, not because the plan had been perfect. That distinction mattered. The perfect hostess was often imagined as someone who never made mistakes when the more realistic achievement was learning how to recover from them. She knew what could wait, what could be reheated, what could be disguised, what needed to be abandoned, and when laughter was more useful than apology. In some families, a ruined dish became a story repeated for years with affection. In others, the woman carried the embarrassment long after everyone else had forgotten it. The standard of effortless perfection encouraged her to conceal not only the failure, but the intelligence required to solve it. By the time coffee was poured, the late roast had become an invisible victory. It had entered the dining room, satisfied the guests, and left no evidence of resistance except the clock in the kitchen and the woman who had watched it. Yet not every hostess possessed the same kitchen budget, help traditions, or freedom to treat dinner as a performance. Beyond the polished suburban table stood many other American tables governed by different rules and judged by very different standards. The rules changed the moment you crossed a neighborhood boundary, entered a different church community, or sat down at a table supported by a different paycheck. The polished suburban dinner described by etiquette books was real, but it was never the only American dinner. On the same Saturday evening, one hostess might be arranging place cards beside crystal glasses, while another borrowed chairs from 2 neighbors and set children at a card table near the kitchen. One household served cocktails before roast beef. Another served sweet tea, coffee, or fruit punch, because alcohol was unwelcome, unaffordable, or forbidden by family custom. A woman in a city apartment carried dishes through a narrow doorway, while guests folded coats over the backs of chairs. A farm family timed supper around chores rather than the preferred arrival hour in a magazine. A black professional couple prepared to receive friends in a home their income could support, but discriminatory housing practices had made difficult to obtain. A recent immigrant family served food shaped by another country, and listened as a guest described it as interesting, a word that could mean admiration, uncertainty, or the beginning of a long explanation. Hospitality was everywhere. The rules governing it were not. Class determined how much of dinner could be hidden. In an affluent household, the hostess might appear after dressing while a cook finished the food, and a maid arranged the dining room. The evening could include several courses because more than one person was available to carry clear, wash and restore. Guests saw a calm woman at the table, and perhaps assumed that calmness was a personal quality rather than a payroll expense. In a middle-income home, the hostess reproduced the appearance of formal service by planning dishes that could wait, borrowing equipment, and moving quickly behind the kitchen door. In a working-class home, spending an entire week's food budget on one evening might be impossible and unnecessary. Generosity could be measured in a full platter, a familiar dish made well, or the insistence that every guest take another helping. The table might hold everyday plates rather than wedding china. It might be covered with clean cotton instead of linen. None of this made the welcome less sincere, yet mainstream advertisements often ranked households through possessions, teaching viewers to read matching silver glassware furniture and serving pieces as evidence of competence. The family with less money was not simply asked to feed guests. It was invited to compare its cupboards with the picture carefully produced by people selling cupboards. Paid domestic labour made class differences visible, while encouraging polite society not to look directly at them. In many white middle and upper-income homes, black women cooked, cleaned, laundered, cared for children, and assisted with entertaining. Their work could make the hostess's ease possible, but the worker herself might be expected to remain in the kitchen, while guests praised the household. She might prepare food she would not be invited to eat at that table, handle expensive objects she could not afford, and return late to a family whose evening had been shaped by her absence. Domestic relationships varied. Some employers and workers developed genuine affection and long familiarity. Others were marked by low pay, excessive hours, disrespect, and racial hierarchy. Affection did not erase unequal power. Calling a worker part of the family could sound warm, while avoiding the less sentimental questions of wages, time off, and security. The dinner party compressed these contradictions into a few rooms, one woman receiving compliments in the dining room, another washing the evidence in the kitchen, both necessary to the evening only one publicly recognized as its creator. Black middle-class dinner parties carried their own layers of preparation, pride, and pressure. A beautifully kept home could express achievement, dignity, cultural authority, and resistance in a society that repeatedly denied black families equal access to housing, employment, education, and public accommodation. Guests might include teachers, ministers, business owners, nurses, civil servants, club members, relatives, or friends whose social network supported the community in practical ways. The meal could be elegant, formal, relaxed, regionally rooted, or some mixture of all four. Respectability might offer protection and status, but it could also demand exhausting self-monitoring. A child's manners, a husband's occupation, a wife's dress, and the condition of the home could be judged not only as family matters, but as evidence unfairly extended to an entire race. White households were allowed to be individually untidy. Black families often faced the burden of representing more than themselves. Yet these gatherings were not merely defensive performances. They offered pleasure, music, courtship, professional connection, celebration, storytelling, and spaces where people could speak more freely than in segregated workplaces or public settings. The table could be a refuge and a stage at the same time, Segregation also determined who could safely be invited and what an invitation might cost. In many communities, interracial socializing could provoke gossip, workplace consequences, threats, or worse. A dinner guest was not always simply a friend crossing town. He or she might be crossing a racial boundary enforced through custom, housing, employment, and violence. Mainstream etiquette books could discuss introductions, forks, and arrival times, while leaving this larger map largely unexamined. Their imagined hostess often lived in a white social world where the most serious danger was seating two incompatible personalities together. For others, belonging carried higher stakes. A black guest entering a white neighborhood might be watched before reaching the front door. A white host inviting black friends could face condemnation from neighbors or relatives. In some cities and circles, integrated gatherings did occur, especially among activists, artists, religious groups, academics, and people willing to challenge convention. But they could not be treated as ordinary everywhere. The rule "invite people who will mix well" sounded harmless, until society itself had already decided who was permitted to mix. Religion changed the menu, the calendar, and sometimes the entire structure of the evening. In a Jewish household, dietary practice might govern ingredients, meat and dairy, kitchen equipment, and which foods could appear together, though observance varied widely from family to family. Friday evening carried the meaning of Sabbath for many, making it unlike an ordinary Saturday dinner, planned around cocktails and office politics. Catholic households might organize social life around parish networks, feast days, fasting traditions, and large extended families. Protestant communities differed sharply from one denomination and region to another. Some accepted cocktails as a normal part of adult sociability. Others discouraged drinking, dancing, card games, or Sunday entertaining. A guest unfamiliar with the household's practice could make an awkward mistake simply by bringing wine, requesting coffee during a fast, or proposing an evening that conflicted with worship. A gracious host anticipated these differences. A less gracious one treated them as curiosities. Religion could make the dinner more formal, more communal, more restrained, or more joyous. It could also determine which subjects were safe to discuss and which silence carried meaning. Regional customs reshaped the table just as strongly. In the South, hospitality might be expressed through abundant food, careful courtesy, and traditions tied to local ingredients, though race and class deeply affected who performed the labor and who received the welcome. In New England, the menu and manners might reflect different habits of restraint, season, and family history. In the Midwest church, circles, farm schedules, casseroles preserved foods, and community suppers created their own standards of generosity. On the West Coast, newer suburbs, military migration, Hollywood influence, and a greater sense of informality could encourage different styles of entertaining. In the Southwest, Mexican-American food traditions, ranch culture, and regional ingredients shaped meals rarely represented accurately in national women's magazines. Cities offered delicatessens, specialty shops, restaurants, apartment living, and guests from more varied backgrounds. Rural homes relied more heavily on distance weather harvest and the practical reality that a visitor might remain longer because the journey was harder. A rule written in New York could arrive in Kansas, Georgia, or California, carrying the confidence of universal truth. Local life then adjusted it until it became usable. Immigrant families often balanced two kinds of judgment at once. Food preserved language, memory, religion, and connection to relatives, yet children and younger adults might worry that unfamiliar dishes would mark the household as foreign. A mother could spend hours preparing something loved within the family and then apologize for it before a guest had taken the first bite. Another might replace traditional food with an American menu from a magazine, hoping the roast salad and molded dessert would demonstrate belonging. Some families combined both worlds, a formal table, arranged according to American etiquette, carrying dishes that came from Italy, Poland, Greece, China, Mexico, Germany, Scandinavia, or elsewhere. Guests might praise the food while mispronouncing its name. Children might translate ingredients or quietly wish nobody asked. Over time, foods once treated as strange entered supermarkets and suburban cookbooks, often simplified, renamed, or separated from the people who had preserved them. The dinner table became a place where assimilation could be practiced one recipe at a time. It could also be a place where assimilation was politely refused. Even within one family, generations disagreed about what proper entertaining required. An older mother might believe that guests deserved the best china, several courses, and formal service. Her daughter might prefer a buffet, a simpler menu, and dishes that did not require her to leave the table repeatedly. The mother could interpret informality as declining standards. The daughter could interpret formality as unnecessary captivity. A husband raised in one region might expect guests to arrive early and remain late. His wife raised elsewhere might consider an unannounced visit almost an invasion. Couples negotiated these habits privately, then presented the result as family tradition. Sometimes the compromise worked. Sometimes one person's tradition became another person's workload. By the late 1950s, the single polished ideal was beginning to compete more visibly with casual forms of entertaining that had always existed beyond its pages. Families were eating outdoors, using patios, serving from buffets, gathering around grills and allowing guests to carry their own plates. Paper napkins and simpler tableware reduced some of the ceremony. Men could be assigned to the barbecue, a development that transformed cooking into a public leisure activity once it moved outdoors and involved fire. The change did not erase class, race, religion, or regional difference. It simply offered another stage on which those differences could appear. Formal dinner rules still mattered, especially when business, older relatives, or social ambition entered the room. But the table was no longer the only possible centre of hospitality. Beyond the dining room candles, the backyard lights were coming on. Folding chairs were being opened, and someone in a short-sleeved shirt was confidently approaching a grill, as though dinner had finally become simple. Casual entertaining promised to rescue the hostess from formality, although it first required her to purchase a different collection of dishes. By the late 1950s, the dining room was beginning to share its authority with the patio, the backyard, the recreation room, and the folding buffet table. Guests might be told to come in comfortable clothes. Food could be arranged in serving dishes rather than presented course by course. People carried their own plates, selected their own portions, and sat wherever a chair, porch step, or patch of lawn became available. On paper, the change looked revolutionary. No place cards, no alternating men and women, no hostess circling the table with a platter heavy enough to affect posture. Yet informal entertaining still required invitations, shopping, cleaning, cooking, arranging, serving, and clearing. It simply moved these tasks into brighter colours. The linen cloth became a checked cotton covering. Crystal glasses became tumblers. Formal china gave way to modern pottery, melamine, or sturdy everyday plates. The woman who had spent all week preparing was now encouraged to look as though the entire gathering had occurred because someone happened to open the back door. Formality had loosened its collar. It had not gone home. The buffet offered immediate practical advantages. Food could be placed on a sideboard, dining table, kitchen counter, or portable serving surface, allowing guests to fill their own plates and return for more without waiting for a formal course. The hostess no longer had to calculate which side of each chair she could approach without injuring someone. She did, however, have to arrange the buffet so that 8 adults could use it without forming a traffic jam between the potato salad and the rolls. Plates came first, followed by food in a logical order, then flatware and napkins placed where they could be collected without requiring a third hand. Sauces needed spoons, salads needed serving forks, hot dishes needed pads beneath them and enough space to prevent sleeves from entering the gravy. Cold food had to remain cool, especially outdoors. A platter placed too near the edge invited disaster. A dish placed too far back required every guest to lean across another dish, bringing ties, necklaces, and elbows into the arrangement. The buffet was informal, but it still needed architecture. Guests could serve themselves. The hostess merely had to design the small public building from which they would do it. Buffet food was chosen for endurance. A dish that demanded immediate service was unsuitable for a table where guests might spend 10 minutes deciding whether to take the chicken or wait for the person ahead of them to finish describing a vacation. Casseroles, sliced ham, cold meat salads, relishes, baked beans, rolls and desserts that could be cut into portions offered flexibility. The food had to tolerate delay conversation's second helpings, and the guest who placed the serving spoon in the wrong dish. It also had to look generous after several people had eaten from it. A half-empty platter could appear abandoned, so the hostess rearranged slices, replaced serving utensils, wiped spills, and quietly transferred food into smaller dishes as the evening continued. Guests enjoyed the freedom to choose. She managed the visual condition of that freedom. The buffet reduced the number of trips from kitchen to table, but it did not eliminate observation. She still noticed who had taken the last roll, whether the salad needed tossing, and whether the mayonnaise had been sitting in the summer air longer than prudence allowed. Casual living had fewer rules, but bacteria remained traditional. The backyard barbecue carried an even stronger promise of liberation. Cooking moved outdoors, the air smelled of charcoal and cut grass, and the husband approached the grill with tongs in one hand and the confidence of a man who had recently discovered fire. Inside the house, cooking was ordinary women's work. Outside, the same activity could become recreation equipment and masculine ceremony. The grill had to be assembled, fueled, lit, and discussed. Its heat was examined with professional seriousness. The host stood before it in short sleeves, sometimes wearing an apron printed with a joke large enough to absolve him from domesticity. He turned hamburgers, steaks, chicken, or frankfurters, while accepting advice from other men who had not been asked. Each possessed a theory about charcoal distance flame control seasoning and the exact moment meat should be turned. The woman of the house had already bought the food, shaped the patties, prepared the sauce, sliced the tomatoes, washed the lettuce, chilled the drinks, made the side dishes, set out the plates, and arranged the yard. He placed meat over coals. This was now his barbecue. The division was not always unfair. Some husbands genuinely took charge of the outdoor meal, planned the menu, cleaned the grill, served the guests, and washed the equipment afterward. Some families enjoyed the change because it brought men and children into work usually left to women. The backyard could make entertaining more collaborative. Guests carried chairs, watched children open bottles and help themselves. A neighbour might bring a salad or dessert. The rules of contribution became more flexible, particularly among close friends. Yet the symbolism remained interesting. When cooking moved outside and involved smoke-specialized tools and public performance, it acquired a different status. The husband could stand before the grill while talking with guests. The wife's work continued between kitchen, patio, refrigerator, and picnic table. He was visible at the center of the fire. She was visible mainly when something was missing. The barbecue did not automatically erase gender roles. It rearranged them around a bag of charcoal. Outdoor entertaining also created problems the dining room had never considered. Wind lifted paper napkins and carried them across the lawn. Flies regarded the buffet as a community announcement. Ice melted faster. Drinks warmed. A sudden rain could send the entire party through the back door carrying plates, chairs, children, and half-cooked meat. Evening insects arrived with no concern for the guest list. Smoke blew toward whichever chair had been chosen by the person least willing to move. Children ran between adults holding hot dishes. A dog appeared beneath the table and began conducting its own buffet. The hostess needed extra towels, insect repellent-covered dishes, waste baskets, bottle openers, and a plan for weather that had seemed impossible that morning. Informality did not remove risk. It introduced nature as an additional guest. The backyard looked relaxed because the mess could spread over a larger area. Patios and outdoor furniture became part of the post-war ideal for families with the space and income to create them. Advertisements and home features presented the backyard as an extension of the house, a place for leisure, cooking, entertaining, and the new suburban promise of private outdoor life. Metal chairs, folding tables, picnic sets, coolers, portable grills, plastic serving pieces, and brightly coloured tableware helped transform the yard into another consumer environment. The family no longer needed only a furnished dining room. It might also need an equipped patio. Convenience expanded the number of places requiring preparation. A hostess could escape polishing silver by buying a complete outdoor set. She could avoid laundering linen by purchasing coordinated paper napkins. She could simplify the meal by using disposable plates, then discover that the plates bent beneath the food and the napkins travelled into the hedge. Every solution developed accessories. Progress remained commercially alert. Home party selling also blurred the boundary between hospitality and business. A woman might invite neighbours into the living room for coffee, dessert, and a demonstration of kitchen or household products. The gathering felt social, but it also encouraged purchasing. Tupperware parties became one well-known example of this post-war model, giving some women opportunities for income recognition and networks beyond the immediate household. The hostess displayed containers, lids, seals, and demonstrations while guests watched handled products and placed orders. These gatherings could be enjoyable, practical, and economically useful. They could also turn friendship into a market. Declining an invitation might feel unfriendly. Attending without buying might feel awkward. Buying could be presented as support for the hostess rather than ordinary consumption. The home became shop, showroom, workplace, and social club at once. The woman who had been told domestic products would simplify her life could now earn money explaining that promise to other women. The containers were modern. The social obligation was ancient. Casual entertaining differed by region, class, and community just as formal dinners did. A barbecue in Texas, the Carolinas, Kansas City, or California might involve entirely different foods, methods, and meanings. The word itself could refer to slow-cooked regional traditions or simply to hamburgers prepared over a suburban grill. Church picnics, family reunions, block parties, beach meals, porch suppers, and neighborhood cookouts carried customs older and broader than the magazines that declared outdoor living a new fashion. Black communities, immigrant families, rural households, and working-class neighborhoods had long gathered around shared food without requiring formal service. Potluck traditions distributed labor more widely, though women still often produced most of the dishes. The new suburban fashion did not invent casual hospitality. It repackaged certain forms of it as modern leisure, equipped them with consumer goods, and photographed them beside a neatly cut lawn. As the evening settled over the yard, the appeal of this new style was undeniable. Guests moved freely. Children remained nearby rather than being hidden upstairs. Men and women talked across smaller groups. Someone returned for more beans without waiting to be offered them. Laughter travelled beyond the edge of the patio. The hostess might sit down earlier than she could at a formal dinner, though she still rose whenever the ice ran low or the serving table needed attention. The paper plates reduced washing. The grill kept some heat outside. The food did not require 4 forks. This was real relief even if it was incomplete. The rules had softened enough to make room for spontaneity contribution, and the possibility that a gathering could be successful without appearing flawless. By the end of the decade, the perfect dinner party no longer had to remain trapped beneath dining room candles. It could step into the backyard, loosen its shoes and eat from its lap. But after the final guest left, the relaxed evening still produced bottles, ashtrays, food scraps, sticky tables, and a lawn decorated with napkins. Casual entertaining had changed the performance. It had not yet discovered how to clean up after itself. The dinner party ended for the guests when the front door closed. For the hostess, it merely changed rooms. The last couple has stepped into the cool night carrying coats, gloves, and a vague promise that everyone must do this again soon. Your husband stands in the hallway for a moment listening as the automobile starts and disappears down the street. Then the house becomes strangely still. The record player has reached the end of its side. Cigarette smoke hangs beneath the lamps. Candle flames bend above shortened tapers illuminating glasses with melted ice, crumpled cocktail napkins and small plates carrying the remains of olives, nuts and cheese spread. Upstairs, the bed is still buried beneath the faint impressions left by other people's coats. In the dining room, chairs sit at uneven angles around a table that no longer argues for respectability. It has given up. Coffee rings mark the cloth. Crumbs collect near the plates. One flower has fallen from the centerpiece and lies beside the salt cellar with the exhausted dignity of someone who also hosted. The guests remember a warm house, a tender roast, lively conversation, and a hostess who appeared calm. You remember which pan is waiting beneath the gravy. The first minutes after departure belong to inspection. You move through the living room collecting glasses and checking surfaces for damage. An ashtray has overflowed. A cigarette has left a small brown mark on one paper napkin but spared the table. A damp circle has appeared on the coffee table where someone set down a glass without using the coaster placed less than 3 inches away. The magazines arranged so carefully that afternoon are scattered beneath chairs. One cushion rests on the floor. A teaspoon has travelled from the dining room and is now lying beside the radio, a journey no witness can explain. Your husband retrieves the empty nut bowl and announces that everyone seemed to have a good time. You agree. This is the first official finding of the evening's domestic inquiry. He mentions that Mr. Harrison laughed several times, which may be useful at the office. Mrs. Harrison praised the flowers. The accounting man ate 2 portions of dessert. These details are examined as evidence that the party succeeded. Nobody left early. Nobody openly argued. Mr. Allen reached home without driving. The roast was praised. By the standards of social survival, the evening has passed. Then the kitchen door swings open and reveals the cost. Dinner plates are stacked near the sink. Serving platters crowd the counter. Pots sit on the stove with dried edges beginning to harden. Coffee grounds wait in the percolator. The roasting pan contains a dark layer of fat and juices that will require soaking, scraping, and perhaps spiritual support. Dessert dishes, cups, saucers, glasses, serving spoons, knives, and forks fill every available surface. The dish towel used earlier is damp. A second towel has disappeared beneath a tray. The garbage pail is nearly full. Leftover food must be transferred into smaller containers cooled safely and fitted into a refrigerator already containing milk, condiments, and the remains of ordinary family life. The guests saw dinner moving outward in graceful courses. Now every course is returned at once. The kitchen resembles a small railway station. After all scheduled arrivals have occurred simultaneously. You remove your shoes beneath the table and stand for a moment on the cool linoleum in stockinged feet. The relief is immediate. So is the knowledge that the floor now contains crumbs. Washing the good dishes requires more care than washing the everyday ones. Fine china should not be dropped carelessly into a crowded basin. Silver should not remain coated in food. Delicate glassware must be washed separately, held securely and dried before water spots appear. Knives may require special attention. The table linen must be checked for stains while they're still fresh enough to treat. You fill the sink with hot water and soap, then begin with the glasses because the water is cleanest. Each one is washed, rinsed, and placed on a towel. Your husband carries dishes in from the dining room, which helps, although he occasionally sets a heavy platter beside the fragile cups, with the confidence of someone who has not spent the afternoon inspecting them for chips. You rearrange the stack. He begins scraping plates, perhaps too enthusiastically, producing sounds that make you turn around. After a few minutes, a rhythm forms. He carries scrapes and dries. You wash and put away. In some households, he might have left the entire task until morning, or considered cleanup naturally attached to his wife's role. In others, couples worked together because exhaustion was obvious and the hour was late. The idealized advertisements rarely lingered here. They preferred the moment when the guests raised their glasses. Dishwater was less persuasive. The debriefing continues over the sink. Your husband reports that Mr. Harrison seemed interested in his comments about the new office account. You mention that Mrs. Harrison barely touched the creamed vegetables, but praised them twice, which may mean politeness rather than dislike. He says the roast was excellent. You explain that it was almost half an hour late. He looks surprised. This surprise confirms that the concealment worked. He had known dinner was delayed, but not how close the entire menu came to separating into unrelated events. You tell him about the beans waiting under the lid, the rolls nearly drying, and the sauce requiring repair. He says nobody noticed. The statement is intended as reassurance. It also lands strangely. Nobody noticed because you made certain they did not. Success has erased the evidence of the skill required to achieve it. The better the hostess performs, the less visible the performance becomes. A disaster prevented looks identical to a day without difficulty. The roast was served. The guests were happy. Therefore, from outside the kitchen, nothing happened. Soon the conversation turns toward the guests themselves, who talked too much, who looked uncomfortable. Did the separated couples enjoy their table companions? Did Mrs. Allen appear embarrassed by her husband's drinking? Was the joke about the office harmless? Or will it return on Monday with sharper edges? Such debriefings can be affectionate, practical, and slightly cruel. Hosts replay the evening because they need to understand it. Social gatherings provide little written feedback. No one completes a card stating that the soup was warm, the chairs were comfortable, and the accounting man should not be invited again without supervision. The host must interpret expressions, compliments, pauses, and departures. A guest who stayed late may have been delighted or unable to recognize an ending. A woman who praised the dessert 3 times may have loved it, or been searching for a safe subject. The invitation vaguely promised in return may arrive next month or never. Hospitality depends on reading signals that good manners deliberately soften. The dishes offer more honest information. An empty platter means something was eaten. A nearly untouched bowl also means something. There is pleasure in this quiet review. The party was not merely an examination. Friends laughed. The flowers looked beautiful beneath the candles. The living room felt warm when everyone arrived from the cold. A story told at the table may be remembered for years. Someone who had felt uncertain found an easy companion. The supervisor relaxed. A lonely guest enjoyed being included. The hostess may take pride in creating the setting where those moments occurred. Her labor produced more than clean plates and cooked food. It produced temporary community. This matters because an account of pressure alone would miss why women continued to entertain, teach recipes, polish inherited dishes, and welcome people into homes that were never quite large enough. They could enjoy the creative work, the planning, the transformation of ordinary rooms, and the satisfaction of feeding others well. The cost did not make the pleasure false. The pleasure did not make the cost disappear. By 11:30, the kitchen is beginning to recover. Leftovers are stored. The china has returned to the cabinet. Silver lies drying on a clean towel. The roasting pan soaks beneath cloudy water, its final judgment postponed until morning. In the dining room, your husband carries away the last cups while you lift the centerpiece and examine the tablecloth. There is a coffee stain near one place, a faint mark of gravy near another, and several crumbs worked into the fabric. The cloth will need treatment before it can be washed, pressed, folded, and stored for the next occasion. The candles are extinguished. A thin line of smoke rises from each wick, and the room darkens around the empty chairs. The flowers no longer need to stay below anyone's line of sight. The place cards are collected, perhaps saved for scrap paper or thrown away. 8 names that controlled the table a few hours earlier now fit easily into one hand. The hostess finally sits. Her stockings have loosened slightly at the knees. Her hair has survived, though not with its earlier certainty. The lipstick is faded. Her feet ache from shoes already abandoned near the kitchen. Your husband pours 2 glasses of water, and the two of you sit at opposite ends of the table where the guests had spent the evening. Without the candles, food, and conversation, the distance between those chairs feels greater. He thanks you. Perhaps he means the cooking. Perhaps he means the whole production. Perhaps he does not fully know how many separate tasks the words must cover. You accept the thanks because correcting its scale would require another hour. The house is quiet now. The public version of the family has been packed away with the china. What remains is the private household, tired, slightly untidy, and more honest. Looking effortless carried a particular cost because the effort could not easily become part of the achievement. A woman who admitted how hard she had worked risked spoiling the image she'd been expected to create. If she complained, the dinner might be treated as a burden she had chosen badly. If she asked for praise, she appeared insecure. If she succeeded silently, the labour disappeared. The ideal hostess was therefore caught in an elegant loop. She worked so that nobody would see her working, and when nobody saw it, the work seemed easy. Yet after the door closed, the house kept the record. It remained in the dishwater, the sore feet, the stained cloth, the emptied refrigerator, the grocery bill, and the hour on the clock. By midnight, nearly everything has been restored. The chairs are straight. The living room glasses are gone. The front door is locked. Tomorrow the neighbours may discuss whether the dinner was successful. Tonight, the house already knows. It settles around you with the soft ticking of the clock waiting for the last light to go out. By midnight, the perfect dinner party had become a collection of quiet objects. The guest list lay folded beside the telephone, its names no longer capable of disturbing the neighbourhood. The candles were dark, their wicks releasing the last faint trace of smoke. The flower arrangement had relaxed into itself, no longer required to remain below anyone's line of sight. In the kitchen, the percolator stood empty, the roasting pan soaked beneath cloudy water, and one damp dish towel hung over the sink like a small flag of surrender. The house that had spent the evening displaying warmth, prosperity, taste, and social ease now showed its private face. A chair sat slightly crooked. Shoes waited beneath the table. The hostess's dress carried a scent of food and cigarette smoke despite every effort to keep the kitchen hidden from it. The performance was finished. Nothing remained to impress. Yet the silence did not make the evening meaningless. It revealed what the party had really been: an attempt to create belonging inside a room, to strengthen a friendship, support a husband's career, welcome a newcomer, repay an invitation, or prove that the household could participate in the complicated exchange of American social life. For many middle-class families, entertaining was one of the ways private life became public evidence. The home represented more than shelter. It suggested whether the family was stable, respectable, modern, generous, and moving in the correct direction. The dinner party allowed those qualities to be displayed through a series of ordinary things: the clean hallway, the polished table, the carefully chosen menu, the husband's confident greeting, the children temporarily absent from view, and the wife who seemed pleased rather than tired. A successful evening could strengthen business relationships, neighborhood friendships, church connections, club memberships, or family alliances. Invitations created a network. One couple hosted another, who returned the invitation later, bringing different people into the circle. Information moved through these rooms. Jobs were discussed. New neighbors were assessed. Marriages were observed. Schools, doctors, houses, products, and reputations were quietly recommended. The dinner table could function as a social office without ever admitting that business was being conducted. Everyone was merely having a pleasant evening. The roast had simply happened to be seated beside opportunity. For the hostess, the party could also offer creative satisfaction. She selected colors, arranged flowers, planned flavors, set the table, and changed the atmosphere of familiar rooms. A house that usually contained school books, damp towels, unpaid bills, and half-finished chores became briefly theatrical. Candlelight softened the furniture. Music filled pauses. Ordinary dishes appeared more important when carried on a polished platter. Friends who rarely sat together remained at the table for hours. A lonely person received an invitation. A shy guest discovered someone easy to speak with. Family recipes were praised and remembered. Laughter entered rooms that might otherwise have been quiet. These pleasures were not invented by advertisers. They belonged to hospitality itself, an ancient human desire to feed others and make space for them. Many women were proud of their skill and enjoyed the work, especially when guests were people they loved. The problem was not that hospitality had no value. The problem was that one narrow version of it was often treated as proof of womanly worth, and the labor behind that proof was expected to remain invisible. The perfect dinner party therefore served another purpose. It reassured everyone that the social order was functioning. The husband appeared successful and well-connected. The wife appeared capable and contented. The home appeared controlled. The guests followed rules that prevented disagreement from becoming disruption. Difficult subjects were softened. Private problems kept private, and excessive behavior escorted quietly to the door. Even the separation of spouses at the table suggested confidence that each person understood the larger social performance. Beneath this order, however, sat questions the evening could not answer. Was the hostess happy or merely effective? Could the family afford the meal comfortably? Who would perform the cleaning and cooking? Did the domestic worker return home exhausted after making another woman's effortlessness possible? Was the unmarried guest invited for companionship or to balance the table? Did the working wife have time to recover before Monday? Did the guest smiling through an offensive remark feel welcome at all? The rules protected harmony, but harmony sometimes depended on deciding whose discomfort would remain unspoken. That silence did not fall equally. Race, class, religion, region, and income changed the meaning of every polished surface. A white suburban hostess might worry about a chipped plate, while a black family faced discriminatory barriers to purchasing a home in the neighborhood at all. A woman employing domestic help could sit through dinner, while another woman carried the dishes, yet the worker's own labor, family, and ambitions remained outside the evening's official story. An immigrant household might adapt its food and manners to prove that it belonged even as its traditions were treated as unfamiliar. A family that avoided alcohol for religious or personal reasons might be judged less sophisticated by people who confused cocktails with modernity. Working-class hosts could offer extraordinary generosity without formal china multiple courses or a room reserved only for dining. The national image of the perfect party was attractive partly because it removed these differences. Everyone in the advertisement had enough money, enough space, the correct objects, and an uncomplicated place in society. Real tables were more crowded. Real lives required additional chairs. The rules began to loosen because people needed them to. Buffets, backyard meals, modern tableware, prepared foods, and shared dishes reduced some of the ceremony. Guests could carry their own plates. Husbands could stand over grills. Children could remain nearby. Friends could contribute food instead of arriving only to be served. The formal dinner did not disappear, and the labor did not suddenly divide itself fairly, but the ideal gained competitors. A gathering could be warm without being flawless. A hostess could serve a casserole in the dish in which it had cooked and still retain her citizenship. A paper napkin could perform its duty without damaging family prestige. Informality created room for spontaneity, though advertisers quickly supplied it with coordinated patio furniture, colourful serving sets, portable grills, and enough accessories to make relaxation another department of household consumption. The market understood freedom very well. It simply preferred freedom that required shopping. Some of the old rules survived because they contained useful kindness. Reply to an invitation promptly. Do not bring an extra guest without asking. Notice the person who has been left out of conversation. Do not demand explanations from someone who declines a drink or a dish. Avoid embarrassing a guest over a mistake. Thank the person who fed you. Help when help is genuinely needed. These principles are less about forks than about protecting other people from discomfort. The trouble came when courtesy hardened into performance, and performance became judgment. A napkin placed incorrectly could be treated as evidence of class. A tired hostess could be seen as disorganized. A simple meal could seem inadequate because a magazine had photographed something grander. Manners should make people feel at ease. Too often the hostess was required to create that ease by accepting all the strain herself. Now the house is nearly dark. Upstairs the children sleep through the final movements below. The bedroom has been reclaimed from the coats. The silver has stopped shining beneath the dining room light because the light is no longer on. The hostess carries one last glass to the sink and checks the front door. Her husband has gone upstairs or sits quietly with a newspaper he never finished. Tomorrow there will be stains to treat leftovers to serve chairs to return, and perhaps a telephone call thanking someone for coming. The evening will be retold in smaller pieces. Mrs. Harrison liked the flowers. Mr. Harrison enjoyed the roast. Mr. Allen should probably not be offered a third drink next time. The supervisor seemed pleased. The accounting man may still be explaining baseball somewhere. Gradually the dinner will become memory smoother and more successful than it felt while happening. Domestic history often improves after the pans have been washed. What remains most important is not whether the hostess used the correct fork or served from the correct side. It is the intelligence hidden inside the evening, the budgeting timing, emotional reading, physical endurance, improvisation, restraint and care, required to bring several people together without allowing the machinery to dominate the experience. Women were often praised for having a gift for hospitality, when what they possessed was knowledge developed through repetition and necessity. They remembered preferences, prevented conflicts, repaired. Food managed children, protected reputations, and kept the evening moving. Calling it effortless made the result look magical. It also made the skill easier to ignore. The dining room is empty now. The wall clock moves past midnight. The flowers rest in darkness, the refrigerator hums in the kitchen, and the table has returned to being an ordinary piece of furniture. The rules that govern this room have weakened, though some of their echoes remain whenever a host apologizes too much, hides the kitchen, or insists that a complicated meal was nothing at all. You do not have to solve these rules tonight. Let the plates remain in their cabinet. Let the guest list lose its authority. Let the old house settle around the faint smell of coffee candle wax and extinguished cigarettes. The hostess has finally sat down. No one is watching the table. No one needs another drink. And for the first time all evening, the roast is no longer anyone's responsibility. Sleep well.